Welcome, everybody. It is day one of the April KARDS OCC Clash. This is the last OCC event before our first ever Officer Club Championship Ultimate, where big bucks will be on the line. Players are going to be trying to snag their last-minute points to get them in an advantageous spot to make sure that they qualify for the event. I'm your host, Christo. I am joined by Bubbles and Berto. Speaking of grabbing last minute points, Berto, you decided, I don't need any of that. I'm going to come cast and just put my feet up. So you're feeling pretty good about making it into the event?
Yeah, after my second third place, I felt quite comfortable, and Jking 7 was already working on the math at that point to figure out how many points he needed to get in, and it looked like I was going to be safe with 30, so I decided to take a little bit of time off, I suppose.
Awesome. Well, we will get into the points in just a moment, and you know we'll do some double checking on Jking's calculations here. But before we do that, Bubbles, it's been a minute. Nice to cast with you again. I do have a question. Where do you find a mushroom shirt like that?
You can either go for your local sort of charity shops or thrift shops for the Americans, or you can do what I do, and you can go to one of these terrible giant organizations on the internet and just buy it off them. You know, you sell your soul to the devil a little bit, but he does give you very nice mushroom shirts in return. So it's a worth it deal.
If you buy it from a thrift shop, does it technically count as foraging?
Well done, sir. Well done. And I feel like foraging would be, more advantageous than helping Jeff Bezos' bank account out. But without further ado, let's bring up the point leaderboard here and see where everybody is coming in to this event. So as Berto mentioned, finishing in the top a couple times puts him up there at 30 points in second place. Head in first with 33. Leo's got 25 points on the board. Tiger in fourth with 22. Followed up by Noan, PyTorch, Jking, and Freddy. So we've got a pretty well-established top 8, but I believe Jking's calculations are sound. Everybody from 5th place above is pretty much qualified for the ultimate. So PyTorch, Jking, Freddy on the bubble here. We will see Jking today. Uwu Moi in 9th is also playing today. Gonna have an opportunity to try and sneak into that top 8 to qualify for the ultimate here in just a couple of weeks. So we've got a lot of action going on. We've got the players ready to go. So we should probably take a look at the bracket. Let's see exactly who is going to be competing here, who is going to be going head to head in this top 8. So we've got Jking and Bezio as our first matchup here today. Jinlun against Lin is our second quarterfinal. Azzy, Moi, Noan, and Head. So Noan and Head already pretty much comfortably in the ultimate. Moi looking to get a couple points to sneak into that top 8, and Jking looking to stick with his spot right now in exactly where he's going to be, wanting to make sure that he does not break that streak of appearing in everything and anything that has OCC tagged on it. So going to be a great day of action here. We're bringing you the quarterfinals today. Tomorrow you'll be able to check out the semifinals, and the finals and third place game will happen on Sunday. So do not miss a second of this KARDS action. So gents, you all know the players probably a little bit better than I do at this point, but we should bring up the player cards. Let's take a run through and a look at who we're going to have competing and dive into a little bit of their math here today. Alrighty then. Speaking of our two-time defending champion, Jking, finishing the season in first, because why the heck not? Have you ever seen an 83.14% win rate in a card game?
Only when looking at Jking's stats document.
I'd like to point out that I think this whole page gives us multiple signs of a psychopath. Not just the 83% win rate, but also the favorite card being put down as double strength with most played as USA. I think it just sort of sends that message all across the board of I am going to come for you, either in cards or in real life, and I will beat you.
At this point, because Jking shows up in every one of these, is he just like rotating through his favorite card? I feel like I'm seeing different ones. It was Night Witches Forever, and now it's just been whatever suits his whim that day.
Maybe he's constructing a deck out of his favorite cards.
One card at a time. I love it. 261 total matches, not a huge number. I feel like we've seen Jking play more in the past, but with an 83% win rate, hey, who cares? So let's move on here from Jking to our second competitor here. This is going to be his opponent, Bezio, who has played 5 times as many games, 1,106 games. Win rate 74%, still pretty good, but finishing 16th, made it through the qualifiers to get here today.
I think he has a pretty wide range, because I remember playing against him last season and the season before, and he's played quite a few decks, some control decks on ladder as well, which is sometimes a little rare to see from the top players to play a control deck on ladder. And then this season, he has Japan most played, so that makes it look like he was mostly grinding with Jagro this season. So I think he's got a very wide range of decks and skills that he's able to pull from, just based off that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And also, he has been around for quite a while, actually. It's the sort of name where when you run into it on ladder, you recognize Bezio instantly. He's been around for a long time, and he has a lot of experience under his belt. So even when you come up through the qualifiers, that doesn't make you less of a threat. And when it's someone like Bezio, who has been around and seen a lot of things, you know they can be a real contender and a real threat to you.
And the title that he has put on every single one of his deck lists, I don't know if anybody else noticed this, is Random Discard Sucks 4 times. Or 3 times. So I'm wondering if he's trying to send a message or if that was just for ease of use.
I think just a little reminder for himself. Every time he goes and looks at his decks, he can just be reminded of why he's playing. He's playing to fight something he truly hates. And I think a lot of us truly hate is the random discard. It's not so bad when it's like, oh, pick a card and discard it. But when it's random discard, it either hits your Commonwealth and it hurts you, or it hits something useless and it hurts your opponent. There's always someone coming out of it a little bit emotionally damaged.
If I appreciate nothing else, it's appreciating somebody who stands for his principles. So I can appreciate messages like that. Speaking of decks, why don't we go ahead and bring up the deck list before we get into this first match here? I guess we're talking about Bezio. I don't know if Mark's got it queued up. He's on the ball. Berto, why don't you walk us through Bezio's 3 lists here?
Bezio coming in with a pretty standard US Germany list. 2 Blitzkriegs, 2 We Can Do It's. Those are really some flexible slots where you can tech it a little more aggressive with a 3rd Blitzkrieg or a little slower with a 3rd We Can Do It, and he goes right in the middle with both. He has a Brit main discard, which has really been rising quite a bit in popularity in ladder, I've seen. Especially if you can get 85th Pioneer Company early. This deck can do crazy things if you're playing things like MI5 on turn 2. Root Out can come super early. And of course, you also have Monsoon Rot and Supply Shortage, which is an incredibly powerful combo in the mid to late game against unit-based decks. And then finally, we have a very popular deck in this tournament, it seems, rising significantly over the past few months, is Soviet France Control. And this is quite a heavy version with cards such as Tractor Factories that don't make it into a lot of lists. And it could be quite scary in the mirror matchup with that heavier sort of build. Although with only 1 Spiring, research could make the difference in this mirror matchup that we are decently likely to see sometime this tournament.
You mentioned the popularity now of the Soviet France list. Obviously, the US Germany's been around for quite some time, but the flip from Brit Air to this Brit list, is this going to kind of be the sort of template going forward for the 3 decks that we see in the OCC?
Well, it's hard to say because this Brit German discard is particularly good against air. So as this deck rises in popularity, we might see Brit fall off and this deck stay on top. Or we might see people start to experiment with other Britain decks that might be better into discard, and then you might have sort of 3 Brit decks that you're considering when you're taking your lineup. If there is another Brit deck that people can find that is good into discard.
That's the interesting part as well, because like you said, Berto, this list is particularly good against air, except the main air deck you're going to see is Brit Air. So as this rises in popularity, you can only bring 1 Brit list, so it's natural that air is going to drop. So I am very curious to see how this plays out in the long term as to, like you said, maybe there's a 3rd list that sneaks in and gets away from that kind of play counterplay. But we will have to stay tuned to find out. Berto, thank you so much for that. Bubbles, why don't you take us through Jking's list and we can take a look at what the defending world champ is bringing here today.
So yeah, there's some pretty similar things immediately on screen. We've got this USA mid-range deck that's really popular, and then this Soviet France deck, which has really risen in popularity very quickly. But I do want to start by pointing out quite a few core details that have changed in this this mid-range deck here for Jking. So usually you do things like Blitzkrieg, and you just try and push the front line and end the game in one decisive maneuver. But the issue of that is it's more of like an all-in strategy where you're going in and putting all these units in the front line and going for a quick end. And that works great against decks like Brit Air and things like this, which can't really do much to stop you once you have this huge front line. But lately we've been seeing a lot of discard. Like Berto said, it counters Brit Air, so it's risen a lot in popularity. And what Jking's done is he's actually changed this deck to be really, really hard tech for this discard. You see, we've got these 2 M4A ones. Obviously, you draw these from your deck when you use discard. But then he's actually taken out all the Blitzkriegs, and instead he's swapped them out for a US military research, which is quite a slow card that can sort of win these grindy games. You know, you can get nukes from them, but you can also get like penicillin and draw a lot of cards from it. So you've got this for these much slower cards. And then you also have island hopping, which is really good in slower games. The sort of the dream combos, you chuck down like a combat engineers turn 1, you put up a Panzer 35 on turn 2, that does 3 damage to face, and then turn 3 you put down an island hopping and you start like repeatedly buffing your board. These repeatable effects, so you can get a lot of bang for your buck, is really powerful against discard. So that deck has been completely altered and tech to beat these discard decks. So that's what we're seeing from this one here. And then this Japan deck, nothing too particularly new. It's just Japan Feigned Retreat. We've seen it 1,000 times. We do see the Panzer III-H coming back in. Now, this used to be played a lot, but it went out of favor just for quicker cards that could get a lot more tempo on the board. But like with this US deck, Jking trying to slow these things down a little bit, make them a little bit more consistent against these control decks, Soviet France control as well, of course, but then mainly discard. That's sort of why we see these main alters in Jking's deck, is trying to beat these discard decks. And then this Soviet France deck, we're going to be seeing this a lot over the next couple of days. This deck is going to be really popular. And then going on to ladder, you can expect to see more of this deck on there as people start to sort of take follow it and try and utilize it. We do see some very interesting things. We've got like the ISU 152 and the Winter Warfare combo, which sort of acts like a to the last man. This is really good against decks like US Frontline, where they can have a really big, strong board, and then you can just reset the game and clear it from there. And then, another few things to look out for this deck are things like the P2F It's the 3K bomber, and it prevents all deployment effects. And then also this KV1 phony war combo, where you can just burn someone out of nowhere. So those are the sort of things to look out from this deck. Overall, I think this is a really well-balanced lineup. It's interesting to see Jagro still showing up here. I know a lot of players see Jagro as their weak point in their free decks. And a lot of people see Brit as the nation to bring. A lot of people see Brit as the sort of second most powerful competitive nation, just behind USA. USA obviously just for this mid-range deck. So it's really interesting to see Jking actually take it out. I imagine a big part of it is this sort of logic that, well, Brit Air is going to be countered by discard, and discard is going to be countered by people teching for discard. So actually, while the 2 Brit decks are really powerful, they're too easy to tech against and too easy to beat with these techs. So I'm just going to swap it out for something almost no one is teched for.
Thank you for that, Bubbles. I'm going to need you to take off the mushroom shirt and put on the pineapple shirt for a second and put yourself in Jking's shoes. So you said he's teching for discards. So we're going to likely see that Brit list go through. What is Jking banning in this situation?
So the Soviet control deck would be what I would personally go into this banning. I feel like it's a very powerful deck, a very consistent deck. And once someone knows how to play it properly, it can be really difficult to sort of break through it. But I also know sort of Jking's philosophy in cards is to play these slower matchups and then rely on outskilling your opponent. How he described it to me in the, I believe, 2021 World Championship is if I'm higher skilled than my opponent, and Jking has a lot of confidence, which does him a lot of good when playing cards, if I can outskill my opponent, if we play for 40 minutes, they have 40 minutes to make error. If we play for 5 minutes, they have 5 minutes to make error. So I know he's very, very confident in these matchups where the game is going to take a while. So I imagine he's fully comfortable in the mirror just based on that. So I think logically I would ban Soviet, but I think Jking, just based on his playstyle, is going to ban USA mid-range just because it creates less room for error from his opponent.
With an 83% win rate, you can come in with all the confidence in the world, let me tell you. All right, Berto, we're putting you in Bezio's shoes. What are you banning in Bezio's spot here?
I don't know. There's no Britain to ban, so it's hard, right? Like that's what you're used to in these tournaments, it feels like so often. But I think I would lean towards banning the US mid-range, at least if you expect Jking to ban your Soviet France, which I think is what most people would imagine. Just because, you have your discard, and he's probably not going to ban the discard, but if you can ban the deck that is best teched into the discard, then you can be more happy with it going through, right? So that's what I would probably pick from Bezio's point of view here.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring up the bans. Let's find out exactly what went down here when both players were given that opportunity. No Soviets today on either side. So that gut reaction, Bubbles, that you had was spot on for what Jking was going to go ahead and do. So this may be the new, hey, let's just ban Britain. Might just be the Soviet list gets banned every single time. So here we go. Game one of this first quarterfinal, Bezio versus Jking.
Looking at the mulligans, go on.
I was going to say, from this matchup perspective, right? This is exactly what Jking wants, essentially, with this sort of tech US Germany list against discard for Bezio to bring the discard list.
Yeah, it's very much the matchup Jking is looking for. But Bezio does have a fairly comfortable mulligan with this supply shortage. The route out is a little bit more redundant because it's just a little bit worse at clearing a high-statted board than supply shortage is. But there's definitely the tools in Bezio's hand, where if Jking gets a slow start, Bezio may just be able to control the game. But really, these M4A1s are going to cause a major problem. You can't play your discard cards on tempo like you'd like to, because usually you want to slim down your opponent's hand as quickly as possible.
Yeah, this is almost exactly the hand that Bezio wants to see in this matchup. The only thing that you would want on top is the Pioneer company.
Yeah, you may get the Pioneers from the His Majesty's Chosen. It's not too late for Pioneers.
That's true. And the Monty coming out too gives him a whole lot more time to use these board clears precisely when he decides to and when he thinks is best.
You can also combo this Monty with the supply shortage. If you can't find one sooner, it helps you bring down these high value units before Jking gets any use out of them. Because obviously once they're pinned and they're slowly taking damage every turn, it just gives you a lot more wiggle room on how you're going to deal with things, especially like an M4A1 or something like that.
For sure. And it also gives you more time to get the root out, even if your opponent plays a we can do it or something on the turn where you have everything pinned, which is a common answer to the pin in Bezio's deck in this matchup. Oh, and the shelling. That's a lot of tools. Jking's deck is well teched, and he does have these Shermans, which will likely draw a lot and potentially cause some issues for Bezio.
That's a very interesting set of three. The Lancaster is sort of not particularly an option. It's just far too slow. And then, you got the choice between the Sexton and the Firefly. I think the Firefly makes a lot of sense considering how problematic M4A ones may be. If it wasn't for the M4A ones and you're against a traditional sort of frontline deck, I think the Sexton would then be higher value.
Yeah, because even if your opponent's playing out a Sherman, I think it's pretty reasonable to still even sometimes prefer the Sherman, the Sexton on the Sherman than the Firefly to the Sherman, just because of the value of that artillery on the board.
And we see the greedy peer always buffing itself, which sort of forces Bezio to play one of these AoE cards and start to wear it down, because it's just going to be doing so much damage so quickly. And you do have fortifications, and you do have to think long term when you play cards. In this sort of matchup, but with every card you play, you got to think, do I need this later? But I think in this scenario, I absolutely get just wanting to deal with this PIR as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and a very interesting small decision there from Jking that he opts to play the third 32nd to reduce his chances of overdraw rather than getting the 109th out and making this Red Devils a little bit stronger in the front line.
I think based on the matchup, I think I prefer not drawing the other 32nd because, every card can be so important, especially when against this card, that I feel like not bricking your own hand when your opponent is trying to brick your hand it can be really quite important.
Yeah, I certainly don't disagree. I just think that these tiny, micro decisions that a lot of players would just autopilot into playing the combat engineers, I think that they can really make the differences in these sorts of matchups. Because Jking also might have been thinking, well, my opponent almost needs a root out here, a root out or Monty anyways, and he knew he wanted to keep his engineers around after that if he has one.
Firefly coming out. Now, I imagine it was originally picked hoping to hit an M4A1, however, there weren't too many great options in Bezio's hand. Normally, this is when you'd want to put down your wolf pack and start to whittle down your opponent's resources, but with these M4A1s in deck, it's really just not an option. Island hopping in hand for Jking. Take in mind, the two cards Jking teched in for specifically this matchup are Island hopping and research, and he's gotten both of them. So
and the M4A ones, and he hasn't drawn them, which is actually good.
Which is perfect. We see the second Firefly now for Bezio. It is a little bit of a slow pay. Gonna opt to go for the Shannon instead. Now what this does do is this clears the front line from any US units, which prevents Jking from getting any more Sherman draw. However, with We Can Do It, Island Hopping, and another Panzer 35T, there are a lot of options here for Jking. You can go Island Hopping, chuck down the Panzer 35T, and proc it instantly. You can just go We Can Do It and buff up your board. I feel like when you have this many options, things are going well for you. This is a symptom of things going quite well for you.
Yeah, and getting the island hopping down here is just such enormous value for this deck because it means Bezio can't really even leave up one tank or one infantry in the front line. Just one of them is an issue that generates more value. And what discard looks to do is to prevent your opponent from generating value over and over again for many turns until they have nothing left. But if they can generate it without using extra cards, they just get it innately for doing what they want to do, hitting you in the HQ, then that is a beautiful thing to have against discard.
So from Bezio's point of view, you really want to get this Monsoon Rot down so that you can clear this board next turn, provided you find some sort of AoE. But that's just not an option because of cards like We Can Do It. So you're in a really difficult situation here if you're Bezio.
Yeah, you can go for it and hope.
It's such high risk.
Yeah, and yeah. Especially with all the cards Jking has drawn. Well, he's only drawn 2 bonus cards from the Sherman. in combination with thinning his deck by the 30 seconds.
Jking here, considering putting down the 99th on the 35T, what this would do is it would mean if Bezio goes for the trade, they have to destroy their tank.
Yeah, and really the only punish here is if, from Jking's point of view, is if Bezio had Pioneer Company and a Monsoon Rot and a supply shortage.
Yeah,
which
to
is
go
pretty
for that
unlikely.
combo.
Yeah.
Now, Bezio, 1 credit of being able to Churchill and then move up one of these Fireflies. So in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, we could see something like Sexton on this 35T in the front line and Radar to get a little healing to try and get out of range. It's not great, but it keeps you alive. And with 9 credits next turn, staying alive could mean the ability to clear the entire board. If you find the supply shortage, that is.
Jking getting very close to their finishing position as well, though.
Yes.
With this Hellcat blitzing in hand.
And the research in hand is also pretty relevant in that he's able to go for those nukes near the end of the game.
I mean, Jking is 1 credit off a potential lethal. If you had the credits to move up the Sherman and move up the Hellcat as well, you can go for the high roll.
The 1 in 5 lethal.
I'm not saying it's the move, but I'm saying it's the move I would do. There's a core difference between those.
Yeah. And an interesting choice. Do you hit the HQ, bring your opponent lower, and get the ability to buff more of your things? Or do you take out the Sexton just to get that 5/7 unpinned? I think it's a pretty close call.
I value going face just because you have this Hellcat in hand. Because then you can blitz out lethal so easily. But I do think going for the trade is reasonable. I don't think there's like a particularly wrong move there. I don't think anyone could flame you either way. I personally prefer putting on the pressure when your opponent is on this little HP.
Yeah, and the draw from the Sherman turning into a little bit of a downside here due to the Firefly being able to... Sorry, not the Firefly, the Churchill being able to burn cards instead of put them back into his hand because of his maximum hand size. And that's
getting the lethal.
Beautiful.
And I mean, I think this is... doesn't die, just fades away. I think this is to be expected in this matchup. You know, Bezio had a really good hand, had a really good start, but it's such a difficult matchup to win. We now see Jking going for the Feigned Retreat next. Obviously, they didn't have any choice, but we see Feigned Retreat from Jking and Bezio having to sort of tech against Jagro. It can be quite a good matchup if you can clear this early start and then prevent Jking from getting any resources to go pop off with the Feigned. And technically you can win post Feigned if you're able to do like double wolf pack and you have enough board presence. But generally, once Feigned has been popped, you are in a lot of trouble. You really have to deplete your opponent's resources before they get Feigned off and just prevent it ever reaching that point.
Yeah, I actually think this is a really high skill matchup from the Jagro perspective because it forces you to be extremely precise with how far you extend into the board, how you extend with, like, especially not bringing out too many 1 health guys or too many 2 health guys onto the board when you're at risk of these supply shortages and for these root out the enemies. And also being willing to go for Feigned Retreat really early. Some people like to greed out on the Feigned Retreat and get out the most of their hand first to not discard too many cards. But against discard, that's almost not an option at all. Because
so I have a little saying
Yeah.
Or an acronym, if you will. I say it to people all the time. It's AFC. AFC, and AFC stands for always feigned on curve. The O gets knocked out because it's an acronym. We don't need the O. But you see people holding feigned for ages. You don't need to worry about cards once you feigned because you have it until your deck runs out of cards. So AFC always feigned on curve, and that rings very much true for this matchup.
Yeah, because you just can't afford to let your opponent have a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 chance of discarding feigned, because that's how they win the matchup. You just never want to give them that opportunity if you can help it.
Bubbles, I do appreciate you going with the PG version of that acronym by dropping the O.
It does certainly make it far more PG. I haven't actually considered that until you mention it, Christo.
And here, Jking doing essentially the bare minimum to force out this root out here.
Oh, but Bezio considering not going for it. I mean, if you take out the Akita, then the I believe it's the Yokosuka becomes, a 1 attack unit. So you can certainly try to be patient.
Although with this many cards in hand, you might just take out the Yokosuka if you're too scared about other Blitz units buffing it up.
And I believe that Panzer 35T is on borrowed time, right? It's got a supply shortage debuff on it.
Yes, it is already dead. I don't even see it on my screen. Alright, and Bezio hoping for a little more value from this root out.
Just put a little bit of tape over that bit of your screen.
Exactly.
Jking now, having to sort of decide how to use these resources. This KI-46, the Dina, you're gonna really want to hit Erados from this, but that doesn't really become relevant until you have less units than Bezio on board. So you want Bezio to sort of clear your board a little bit, use some more AoE, and then try and get an Errado from this KI-46, and then try and find Feigned Retreat off the Errado. That's a big part of how Jking is going to win this long term if Bezio is able to keep clearing Jaking's board.
Bezio looking at the second supply shortage to clear the board with attacking into the the verbal wind.
Sorry, go on.
I'm just thinking about it's so hard for Bezio with Jking being so conservative with his resources, because even though he's hit 3 out of 5 of his board clears, it still feels like he doesn't have enough. And that's going to be hard for him.
I'd really like to see from Jking, sorry. We're on a first name basis, me and Jking. We're pretty close like that.
Yeah, you go way back.
I really like to see from Jking using this surprise attack to play around the potential Ultra. Because that's another way you lose this game, is if your Feigned Retreat gets hit by Ultra, and then it's just sort of over on the spot. So that's something I'd really like to see Jking looking out for, and just being very careful about.
Yeah, I am certain he will not be playing Feigned when Bezio has 3 credits held up, unless Ultra is already gone or checked for with another order. Alright, this seems like a pretty reasonable play from Bezio, although still not the spot you want to be in by any means. And he doesn't have a good answer for this key coming back down the next turn. Not really. You can Annihilation it, which is a good answer to key, mind you. But with these 1/1s in the front line, that's at least 4 damage that's coming through if you're playing Annihilation this turn.
And I'm surprised this surprise attack coming out is it's telling us a little bit of what Jking is thinking at the moment, which is just to try and win with what's on board and not worry about the long term, just to try and close out the game as soon as possible. Now, how do you feel about putting down a C4 Highlanders and then holding up the Ultra? Is it too slow? Do you need to kill this KI immediately? The issue of killing this KI-83 is you do risk just being killed or blown out by any Blitz tank or a Type 93. There's so many potential options here that can just close you out on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, also if you go for the C4 Highlanders, you immediately lose to Sendai Regiment as well, which Jking runs 2 copies of. Like, there is no way you can play this turn and feel comfortable about what you're doing. Probably the one that results in you dying the least is Root Out and Hold Up Ultra, but that's not very impressive either.
That feels real bad, but looks like that's going to be the move. I mean, if you don't hit this KI-46, this Dina in Jking's hand with the Annihilation, then you are almost guaranteed to be killed because this draws 2 1-drops from your deck. The chance it finds a Type 93 are really, really high. Gonna find a lot of 15th Cavalries.
Yep. That's all 45. Of the 15th. That's all of the 15th Cavalry and Bicycle Regiments from Jking's deck now.
However, this provides potentially a really strong turn for Bezio. You hit your fighter into this Ki-83, and then you go for the root out and clear what's left on the board. The only downside is you have 3 HP. And that is quite a large downside.
And you're floating 2 credits.
Yeah, but also you got to do what you got to do, you know.
Yep.
Sometimes credits have got to be floated. That's just how life is.
Yes, it's absolutely the play that you need to make. You just wish that you had some sort of 2K fortification or something here.
Oh, and a Type 93 off the top. If Jking can put Bezio down to 2 HP, that is a far more dangerous health range to be on. You know, a Whirlwind, a 35T, or a Desperate Measures, they all offer lethal from there.
And Jking looking like he's just going to maybe play this Arado to play around maybe MI5 a little bit.
I also think playing down the Arado plays around the Churchill a little bit better. You're now threatening lethal on board, even with a Churchill. Now, we do have the C4. You can go for the C4 and then go for the case yellow, take out either one of these cavalries or the Type 93. You can also... no, I believe that is the only move. If you go for the C4 plus the Wolfpack, you open yourself up to be traded by both cavalries and then traded with the Dina, and then Jking can go for lethal with this Arado. So I believe the only move that guarantees survival on board is C4 plus case yellow.
Yeah, and good on Jking to recognize this kind of being Vetzia's first turn to use discard or an effect like MI5 and playing out the Arado because of it. Because that makes a big difference this turn.
Yeah, that and playing around the Churchill as well, which I'm sure went through his mind. So it's a sort of double whammy where he's really just playing around all of Bezio's options and shutting down the discard player's choices, ironically.
And Monsoon Rot really... Oh,
the
my
send off the top. I mean, there's nothing more to be said.
Well, there you have it, friends.
2 quick ones.
Jking moving on, and I believe this victory does guarantee him a spot at the OCC Ultimate now in a week. So big congrats to Jking. I'm sure he's not done here this weekend, but probably already looking forward a little bit to next weekend as well. And Berto, I just wanted to highlight something specific that you had said during that matchup where Jking chose to play the 32nd instead of dropping the Combat Engineers and the Red Devils and moving them forward. Because you said most players would be on autopilot. And it's funny because as I was sitting there staring at the screen, I was going, well, yeah, why don't you just drop the Combat Engineers and move the Red Devils up? That seems totally reasonable to me. So I think you highlighted really well the kind of nuance that Jking has in the way of, hey, what's this matchup? What is my opponent actually playing? And thoroughly thinking through every move he makes.
Yeah, I mean, that's his strength, the tiny details. He pays attention to all of them.
Absolutely. So big shout out to Jking there. I'm sure we will see Bezio again and again in these OCCs as he continues to perform quite well. But thank you both for the cast. We're going to head to a quick break and come back here with our second quarterfinal matchup. Welcome back to day one of the April OCC. I am now joined by, once again, Berto Burrito, number 2 in the point standings for the soon-to-come Ultimate, and his friend Jking. What's up, Jking? We just saw you defeat Bezio there. How you feeling after that matchup? Did it go according to plan?
Yeah, feeling pretty good. It was nice to see the lineup build of targeting discard worked out really well. Bubbles hit that nail right on the head. That is really what I went in to the tournament trying to do, and worked out really well.
Awesome. Seemed to line up pretty nicely with the matchups and everything. So speaking of matchups, why don't we go ahead and check out the bracket and see exactly what we are going to be showing you here next. So you did see Jking defeat Bezio going on to tomorrow. Unfortunately, Lin had to pull out last minute from the event. So Jinlun does get the win, does get to advance and face Jking in the semifinals. But up next, we've got Azzy versus Moy. And we have Moy here, if I'm looking at the point standings, in 9th, just from a tiebreaker, right below Freddy. So Freddy not competing here today. Jking, I know you do all the math. I know you're very critical with that. Any thoughts on what Moy has to do today to make sure that they are able to get into that top 8?
So mathematically speaking, every single player in top 8 of this OCC clash could make top 8 of the OCC Ultimate. For Azzy, it would be a lot harder. Azzy would need to win the entire event that's the only thing. Anything less than winning, Azzy's not going to make it. Moy has a little bit more space to place. I believe it's 3rd place and up will be enough to clinch the spot for Moy. So either way, it's critical winning this first game for both of these players.
Right on. So let's take a look at their profiles and see what has led them to get here today. You got Azzy here playing 626 matches for a 75% win rate, finishing 2nd in the season, right behind you. Jking, any thoughts on Azzy being here today? Again, like you mentioned, having to probably win the whole thing to end up in the top 8.
I mean, no surprise to me, honestly, seeing Azzy place in a top 6. He's done it before. In my mind, Azzy is one of those regulars who's maybe not making top 6 every single month, but you are not surprised if they do make a top 6. And I would like to call out their favorite card being Island Hopping. That is one of my favorite cards as well. Solid choice on that.
We saw it put in work in the previous series. So Azzy going up against Moy, and I think, as we bring that card up, you mentioning Azzy maybe not being top 6 every month, this new format for the OCC definitely punishes if you're not able to stay kind of at the top of the leaderboard regularly, because you do have to compete, and perform at least really well in maybe one clash, if not a couple of them, like Berto, who, gets to take a month off just for being a badass here. And next up, we got Moy, 292 games, a little bit on the lighter side, still a great win rate of 72%, finished 28th and worked their way through the qualifier to be here today. 32nd Infantry being their favorite card, another card that we've seen you rock in the previous matchup. Berto, any thoughts on Moy?
Well, I think Moy might have the 2nd lowest games next to Jking here. And coming in 28th, just saying, all right, I'll get the top 36 and I'll play in the qualifiers, which, is never a consistent strategy. But if you do come out on top, I think it's pretty clear that you earned it when there's so many people right near the top fighting very fiercely for just top 2 spots. I think that it goes to show that he has a good understanding of tournament lineups.
Right on. We've talked about it before where, getting to participate in that qualifier gives you a little bit of an insight into some of the tournament play that you might end up seeing in a clash like this. So lets you maybe further hone that deck list, further hone those matchups. So, speaking of that, why don't we continue with Moy and bring up their deck list here? And Berto, you can walk us through exactly what kind of heat they're packing for this third quarterfinal here today.
Right. So again, we have this U.S. Germany mid-range list, more of the standard Blitzkrieg instead of the island hopping and research package. The one really interesting thing is that we do have Patton in this list, which can be really explosive, really fast, or you can find it at an inopportune time when you don't really have enough cards to go with it, and it can be really low impact as well. So it can be quite hit or miss. And then we have the classic Brit Air with a few more interesting choices like Suse to get a little extra pin, make these Type 94s more consistent. And then we have another Soviet France in this tournament, running a single copy of Mobile Defense, which is an interesting card. It seems most players are opting out of using it these days, but it is very powerful and not to be underestimated, and also running 2 copies of Scorched Earth, which can be really, really useful against mid-range and aggro decks, but can be really bad into decks like Discard or Heavy Control. So yeah, very interesting lineups to see.
Very nice. So let's take a look at the other side. Let's see what Azzy's bringing and if they're going to have to deal with some of that control or some of that discard. Jking, why don't you walk us through exactly what we're going to see here?
Yeah, so Azzy, just a overview of the 3 decks. It is US German midrange, Britain German discard, and Soviet France control. So 3 decks that we have seen already in this tournament. However, I'd like to point out the different builds of these decks, and this even just 1 or 2 card differences that shows these players sort of personalization on the decks. I don't think we have a single deck which is a card for card copy of another deck in the tournament. Every deck is slightly different, and starting off with this US German deck, we see he's not running his favorite card of island hopping, unfortunately. But he is running 1 Flampanzer, which is a card that sometimes gets teched into this US German midrange if you can find the spots for it, and he certainly has found the spot for it. So it looks like he might be trying to get that win rate into air up even more. And I mean, we've seen there's quite a bit of air in this tournament, so we're calling out air rather than in my build, I decided to call out discard. And these are the 2 most popular British decks, and Britain is usually the most popular nation, so not a solid strategy there. Then we look at his Britain-German discard, and this is quite different than the discard we saw from Bezio. Azzy is running 2 honeys, only 1 fortification. He's running a 4th supply shortage. He's running the Fog of War. So it looks like he's sort of building this deck to be a bit more anti-aggro. He's cut his Majesty's Chosen. So it's looking like, in general, it's slightly, not faster, but it's going to be able to respond slightly more consistently. And it will have, with the Honey, just a unit to play down early in the game if you're against a very aggressive deck, especially against Jaguar, or you can use it later to heal off of Convoy, Lend-Lease, even Case Yellow. So that might help him out, especially against the air from Moy. And then the last deck, Soviet France. We see from Azzy that he's actually running 2 Spy Ring. He's got the 2 Chaika. He's got 3 copies of Scorched Earth, which is, I mean, we've seen the whole range. Some people running 1, 2. In my Soviet France, I'm running 0. He's running 3. And Scorched Earth is just such a powerful card, and obviously it affects both sides of the board. And Soviet France is quite a unit-based deck. So some people like not running it because it affects your own things. Some people love running it because you can just play it early in the game, especially against aggro if they've removed your board quite early on and have a lot of tempo. You just play Scorched Earth and grind their tempo and pressure to a complete halt, and then you just start slamming down guards. And it looks like, again, sort of like the US mid-range, that this could be teched against air specifically, because without Scorched Earths, it's essentially impossible to beat air with Soviet France. You need to get an incredibly good hand versus an incredibly bad hand. But once you start getting cards like Scorched Earth in here, Petliakov, really, really good if you can get that down safe on turn 3. That's going to be stopping a couple of key deployment effects from air. And Spy Ring, it might not seem like it, really solid card against air because you're not doing a whole lot else on turn 2 usually, and if you can get a V1 flying bomb, the German research off of Spy Ring, that can be used to take out a crucial bomber. So very interesting lineup from Ozzy.
That's so interesting that you were mentioning, feels a little bit teched against air, but I don't know, this seems like the first event that we're really seeing less air than we normally do. It was like 80% air, and then every once in a while somebody would throw in like a little Brit discard, and then all of a sudden it's like swinging closer to that 50-50 mark. Yeah,
it just shows air's dominance in the meta, that 50% of the players bringing the same deck to the tournament is considered like, oh, it's like practically gone.
I think Bubbles said exactly that before we even started rolling today. He's like, that's it, Brit Air's dead. Only half the people are bringing it. But it used to be everybody had Brit Air. Everybody banned Brit Air until you couldn't ban a deck because you got to the finals, and then you would play it out. So definitely interesting to see the changes sort of in the meta and how people are adapting to things. But that being said, Berto, let's swing it over to you. If you're in in Moi's shoes, what are you banning here? What are you looking at on the board?
Well, I'm still not sure that you're that comfortable running into air. Like the Soviet deck, it does have a little bit of tech, but the deck itself, these infantry guards just aren't very impactful in the matchup. So I'm still not sure if I'd let that air through from my perspective. But it's hard to say.
I love how every time I ask you that question, Berto, you kind of smile and go like, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. It always feels like the hardest part of any tournament decision that I make is the deck list, because it revolves so much around what your opponent is thinking, and I don't have those sort of social skills. I don't know what people think. So how are you supposed to decide when it's based on somebody else, when it's fully independent of what your opponent does? Then it makes it really, those decisions to me are really easy, and these decisions are so complex. However much thought you put into it, you can get different answers each time, it feels like, in some matchup situations anyways.
But I think you bring up a great point there, because even when we were talking, for example, about the previous matchup in Jking's series, where, okay, he's teching against discard. So if I'm his opponent, I have to assume he's letting my discard deck through because that's what he's teching for. So do I then figure I'll bring it and I'll probably just lose? So how do I get my, like, there's so many things that go through your mind trying to figure out how you want to line that up. So I totally get where you're coming from. So we'll ask Jking the hard question instead, and ask Jking what he thinks from a ban perspective here.
When it comes to bans, I think there's, in this particular matchup, I think there's two lines of thought. So from Moi's perspective, if his air gets banned, his other two decks are actually fine into discard. However, if your air does not get banned, you want to ban discard immediately, and discard is sort of the quote-unquote safe ban. However, if you expect your opponent to ban your air, you shouldn't ban discard. You can easily just ban Soviet France. And then from Betsio's perspective, or sorry, not Betsio, from Asu's perspective, it's sort of the same thing, where it's, if your opponent is banning your discard, then you should ban their air, because you're not 100%, even if you're kind of teched towards it, you don't really want Soviet France into air ever. However, if you think your opponent's not going to ban your discard, then you want to leave that air up and probably ban their Soviet France, because right now Soviet France beats US most of the time, discard beats air most of the time, air beats Soviet France most of the time, and you have no idea what your opponent's going to ban, because it's essentially just rock, paper, scissors at this point. So yeah, I think Berto is kind of correct, and it's really anyone's guess as to what the correct thing to ban is in this situation.
That was an exceptional answer, and I feel like I need a flow chart to figure it out. But The beauty of it is, instead of guessing, we can just show you what the bans are. So let's bring them up and take a look and see what the decisions here were made as you lose in the Brit list and then the Soviet on Moy's side. Does that kind of make sense with one of those things you spun out there, Jking?
Yeah, I think this is very much a case of Azzy going for the rock and, unfortunately for him, Moy picking paper, because Azzy now is going to have to contend with this Brit Air list without the help of his discard list, which is going to be hard. He's starting off with US midrange, though, which is definitely the better of his two decks to play against Air. So he's going to hope that he can get this win in through now, just so he has 2 chances with his Soviet deck.
I'm curious about holding the second Paracy here from Uwumoy in his opening hand. I'm not super sure exactly what you are wanting to hit with it so bad that you keep it in your opening hand.
Yeah, that is an odd choice. It's the only Paracy he runs in the deck, so it could just be that he feels it's a very powerful card in the matchup. I mean, with the power of Half Track in particular, even if you get it on a bomber and get a free trade onto something, it's almost certainly going to be removed without having to trade again. Or if you play it on a Gladiator because you want to get a 2-for-1 with your opponent attacking into it. As he has Patrol, as he has Half Track, Stars and Stripes, Strategic Bombing, of course. So I feel like Paracy isn't too impactful enough to keep, since it's especially a card that requires a card already on board. And we see this Red Devils with the Combat Engineers. Moy does find the air superiority, but
this Red Devils and 99th is the one situation I think that second Paracy is particularly good into, though, here.
Yeah,
especially if he trades into Aichi here, he can play around the one copy of second Paracy, which you probably don't expect your opponent to keep if you trade into the 1/1. But
and going face is probably the worst case scenario out of the the 3 possibilities with attacking. Specifically punished by this Paracy, which again, it's a single copy. You don't expect your opponent to keep it in the mulligan.
Yeah, I can't blame Azzy for not playing around it, but boy, does he get punished for not doing so.
I mean, even with that huge punish, his hand is still looking very strong. This is basically everything you want from an opening hand of US midrange into Air. And he's going to move up the Whirlwind, kill the Aichi, so the second Aichi comes in pinned, can't attack, and has Stars and Stripes to play on the following turn if Moy plays more units on the board. And we see Moy can't play more units on the board.
Yeah, this is
likely going to push up this Paracy.
This is one of the risks of keeping Paracy in your hand, is that you do want to find those one-drop Brit Air units. Although, of course, this is still far from average. You have a lot more low-cost British air units than you have close air supports.
But it's worth noting, if that air superiority was instead, let's say, like a Gladiator, or even like an Albacore would be even worse, and he plays it, and he plays a close air support, and he clears the front line, but Paracy gets stuck in the support line, the strategic, or the Stars and Stripes would just come down and wipe it. So Moy, through his misfortune, is actually managing to dodge Azzy's quote-unquote like perfect hand against Air. And this means that with the Aichi with Smokescreen, even though Azzy can take the front line again, can't clear this bomber, and you're going to start to be thinking about Empire Strikes in Azzy's position. You don't have Sherman in hand. Your units are all very low health, and you have no way of boosting the health of them right now. So how much do you put onto the board? But if you don't put enough onto the board, you risk just losing to units.
Yeah, absolutely. See, it's in a difficult spot, and you can't really not play the 30 seconds to play around board clears, because you also need to draw those cards.
Yeah, and he had the possibility of playing dive bombing on the Aichi, just stop it attacking, hope your opponent plays more units, and you clear it with the Stars and Stripes. But of course, again, with Empire Strikes being a risk, if he goes for that play and your opponent just plays Empire Strikes, clears your board, and doesn't attack anyways, you just wasted a dive bomb and your board's cleared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he'll be glad to see that the Empire Strikes isn't coming out, but he'll definitely be hoping to find one of those Shermans in his deck real soon.
Yeah, I think Azzy's ability to win this game really hinges on his next 2 or 3 draws, because Moy's hand is not exceptional, except Moy's deck, the card draw in Moy's deck, 1, there's just more of it, and 2, it's unconditional card draw. It's just draw 2 cards, draw 4 cards. Whereas Azzy's Shermans are very much conditional, and he's not going to have the front line for in 3-4 turns if he keeps just drawing these plain and simple infantries.
Yeah, and if Lulu Moy just finds something like a Gladiator, it's it's going to be huge. Even if as he plays a dive bombing here on the Sexton, you can still buff it up to be able to use the attack if you find a British air unit to be able to buff it. I would expect the dive bombing here.
Yeah, dive bombing, attack, bring it down to 2 health. So if a British air unit cast comes out, still dies to Stars and Stripes, or if no unit's played, still dies to Stars and Stripes, decides to save it, and Suisse, that is a good... I mean, we've seen a couple of players tech Suisse into their decks for this tournament, and I've not been convinced by it, but this is certainly a very good place to find it, because this is going to let him pin up the rest of the board. He gets a free attack with the Sexton and kill one of these things. He still can't stop Sherman, but by this point, you're pretty certain your opponent doesn't have Sherman in hand.
Yeah, and still not playing any more 30 seconds. This surprises me, because like, it could be right, but I've been trained by this deck to be so terrified of drawing the 30 seconds before you play them out. And when it's so important to get these draws and to not accidentally hit a dud card in another 30 second, it terrifies me to see just holding this 30 second in hand.
I think by this point, I feel like if your opponent has Empire Strikes, unfortunately, you just lose the game. That's the reality of it. If you have 2 or 3 or 30 seconds to play after an Empire Strikes, they're infantries that do nothing in the support line, and your opponent has artillery and a bomber. They're just going to all die. So I feel like you're risking more by not playing them than you are by playing them into a potential board clear. And we see Moy actually decides to just take out 2 of the units, attacks with the bomber, doesn't commit anything else to the board, doesn't hold up the Ultra. How do you feel about this play?
I think it's pretty reasonable. Like, I mean, I probably would have expected the dive bombing to come out if my opponent had it. And there's not too many ways to get that extra damage to kill the bomber. This is the second 99th. He wasn't playing it earlier. Goes to kill the Sexton instead. He could have full cleared this turn if he chose to dive bombing the Sexton, play Stars and Stripes, and attack into the Sexton. But not opting to full clear, instead developing a little more presence on the board and keeping the Stars and Stripes, which is, granted, an extremely powerful tool.
And Moy finds a 4th close air support, and still the only British air unit in his hand is the Wellington, which gets its cost reduced when you play orders, but the only orders in his hand needs to be played on a British air unit. So he can pin the front line, he can get an attack in with the Aichi. The credits here are just really awkward. He can't do more than 2 things. He can pin hold up Ultra, he can pin attack with Aichi, he can attack with Aichi Ultra, he can Wellington attack with Wellington and Cass, but...
Or Wellington double Cass and attack with the Aichi.
That is true. I mean, honestly, about at this point, that might be the best play.
It's a bad play, but yeah, it could be the best one.
Instead, he decides to go for the Suisse. which means Assy is going to have the ability to clear out these bombers. By this point, you got to be wondering what is in your opponent's hand, because they clearly don't have an Empire Strikes. They clearly don't have Cass and a British air unit. If they had Gladiators, they probably would play them. If they had maybe from Assy's hand, you're thinking my opponent's hand is either like all Cass or like all draw. So either way, I do think you go for the Stars and Stripes Skytrain, just try to build your board as much as possible, because either way, you're probably going to have at least a turn or two of pressure. And Moy finds the convoy. That's going to be a huge help.
Yeah, not bad at all. And the Gladiator. So, a few ways to play this. You're probably dead to a tank and a blitzkrieg, a blitz tank and a blitzkrieg. So, and I do believe Azzy runs Greyhounds, right? So you might feel the need to trade Wellington out here, play a Gladiator, even though the Wellington's going to die for free.
You could do Wellington Cass attack into
Yep, it is an option.
into it, which would keep it alive on board. Of course, if your opponent does have any Greyhounds, it will die. They could even Blitzkrieg to trade it.
You're probably not too mad if they use a Blitzkrieg to trade it out. But if they have another... Oh, God. If they have that, you're probably pretty upset about it, though.
And, I mean, as bad as it looks, Air is just one of those decks where... But before we see what Moy draws, Moy could easily draw Monty into Lend-Lease that finds Swordfish and then Empire Strikes. Like, Albacore Empire Strikes.
Yeah,
and
I mean, or just
completely
shelling.
Win the game. I mean, yeah, shelling buys him a turn. Unfortunately,
and gives him the opportunity to play out these units to be able to trade.
And he's technically not dead.
The best kind of not dead.
He's gonna finally be able to play out a second cast on
and
these
hope
fighters.
His opponent trades for some reason. Did Azzy miss lethal by moving up the Skytrain? By not allowing
but Moy has given him lethal on board by playing units. He needed to not play units because now Azzy can trade out the 32nd, push up the 10th Engineers, and hit face for exactly 12.
I think it's still the right play from Moy, and just hope your opponent doesn't see it, to be honest.
Oh, of course, and he can, for even more damage, trade out the Skytrain. He doesn't even need to trade out the 32nd. But yeah, I mean, Moy needed to not play anything, go down to 1 health, hold up the Ultra, and then pray you find
Monty
into Lend-Lease, and the Lend-Lease draws you 3 Swordfish and an Empire Strikes. But that is not what happened.
You already had 1 bomber, but I suppose we can do it was going to come down the next
Yeah,
turn.
Azzy takes game 1 and now has 2 chances to win with the Soviet France deck, but the first one is going to be going up against Air.
Which is not a good matchup, but 2 Scorched Earth and a Chaika is a real good hand into the matchup.
Yeah, that is the hand you want to see. Absolutely. However, even with that hand, I'd still say Moy's favored like 75-25 at this point. But that's up from like a 95-5, or down from a 95-5, so... as you can't be complaining.
Here? I don't think I would. I think I'd wait 1 turn. And if I'm Moy, I'm just gonna convoy.
Yeah, I think if you're Azzy, you don't want to play the Chaika yet, because just attacking with Aichi, and if your opponent has an air sub, your Chaika has accomplished nothing. And it's definitely too early to play Scorched Earth. You want your opponent to play probably 1 more unit at least. And
yeah, I mean, when you run 3 and you already have a 2nd in hand, like, you can be a little more aggressive with them. Sometimes
If
you
it-
can get an opponent to like really overextend after the first one because it's the only way to get damage in. But yeah.
If it was 2 planes or like 2 units in the support line, I think a Scorched Earth would be a good call there. But with the Type 94 in the front line, your opponent still has 3 slots, and 3 slots is more than enough. And as he picks up the 52k now, I mean, this is still favored for Moy. That's just how crazy this matchup is. And Moy's hand is not terrible by any means. But Azzy is certainly making this more and more doable with every single draw here.
Yeah, and the next draw is another Chika, so that's really gonna.
Unfortunately, it's just kind of awkward. Your opponent didn't play any units last turn, so you don't really want to Scorched Earth. This Chika play, I'm not a huge fan.
Maybe getting a little impatient playing this here. He knew the reasons to hold it last turn, and he still knows them this turn, but opting to still play it.
Maybe the idea is it does just... And Berto calls it exactly, as he does find the second Chika off the top. I mean... As I was saying before being interrupted by that bout of laughter, possibly the idea of playing the Aichi is it just buys you time, because if your opponent does have the air sup and they're going to go for the trade air sup, they're essentially passing their whole turn, and if they're not, they're playing one other unit in the support line, and then you can Scorched Earth and play the Chika off the top. He saw this play coming.
He's just that good.
So he decides finally that with his future turns probably being dedicated to getting down these 5-cost guards, he is just going to play on curve, play out the Scorched Earth, then the Chika, slow his opponent down to a halt. And unfortunately, Moy has quite a few options. Well, unfortunately for Azzy, Moy has quite a few options to rebuild a board of units that can attack. Quite frankly, I mean, nothing feels amazing. You can just HMS Illustrious kill the Chika. That does not feel great, though.
That feels so awful. You could HMS and move him up in case the second Scorched Earth comes down. But that's pretty wild, and that's pretty silly. I really feel like you got to avoid trading this out.
But that is what he's going to do. He trades out the Chika, and honestly, that kind of works out because... I mean, Azzy's just going to be perfectly fine playing a Rima here, most likely. But had that trade not happened, Azzy very easily could have just attacked into the Aichi with the Chika and played the 52k to take out the Bomber, which probably would have been fine with that play as well.
Well, that would have been a lot better for Moy, though, because then your opponent's down at 52k. Well...
Yes, but your opponent still has the 2 bodies on the Chika. And looking at Moy's hand now, I mean, I think you're fine just sacrificing another air unit to a 52k if it means you can get this Chika off the board, and with 2 surprise attacks, Albacore, a Paracy, he's going to be able to deal with all of the ground units he wants from Azzy, if he can just be able to attack with his bombers.
Yeah, and this is the issue for the Soviet deck. It is still primarily a infantry guard based deck, and bombers don't really care about infantry or guard, so that's, even if you tech it against air, it is still doing something.
And Azzy making an incredibly odd play.
Like, I guess he's hoping for an overextension into the Scorched before he gets his own stuff down, but still.
My only explanation would be that he is worried that if he plays Reba, it's going to get taken out for tempo by 2 surprise attacks, but that's just always going to happen. Your opponent's not going to be surprising attack a 2-1 Ishak.
Yeah, it's not like the surprise attacks ever go away in this game.
And he gets the 52k down, but he's still playing really off curve, and this is giving Moy a huge chance to come back in this game, because now the HMS Illustrious can come out, take out this 52k, and it doesn't really matter if you scorched these bombers, because nothing is going to be able to reach them anytime soon. If you play out the KV, it's just simply going to die to the surprise attacks, and if you play out a Rima, Moy can go for the Parasy, take it out, or he could even just play it slower. He doesn't even need to, and with this Suisse, Moy is going to be able to take out 2 units at once if they are beside each other, and because of the way these Rimas work, you want your units to be beside each other if you're Azzy.
Yeah, one thing that I find funny about this matchup is if you're able to find the buffs for your bombers, like close air support, like naval supply run, there can be times where your opponent has scorched earth your units, except that they're all like 4 or 5 attack anyways. So you're just like, all right, whatever. I'm happy to spend 4 credits to deal 4 damage on repeat every turn against a value deck. I'll win eventually.
I do recall building a Soviet Japan deck maybe 10 or 11 months ago in an OCC and being like, this is going to be a Soviet deck that beats air. And I lost to exactly that. They played Swordfish on 1 into, I think, double Swordfish on 2, and I played Scorched Earth, and they just played Cast, and killed me over like 15 turns with these 4-op bombers.
And Uumoi, at the very end of his turn, deciding to do a sneaky little play, and that is missing 1 damage to hold 3 credits up to force your opponent to think about Ultra.
And I absolutely love these types of plays, because that gets in your head. Even if your opponent isn't going to be playing an order this turn, even if they don't even have an order in their hand, that's going to be in their head, because now they think you have Ultra in hand. So if it's 5-10 turns down the line, and they're in a situation where you're floating 7 credits, and they think, well, they have 1 card, 2 cards in hand, but I know they floated 3 credits 10 turns ago, so I'm going to play around Ultra in a situation I might have otherwise not played around it. And, I mean, 1 damage probably isn't going to be... This is so favored. 1 damage is probably not going to be what decides this game. It's not typically AO trying to burn Soviet France out. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Moy going for the Suisse over the Albacore last turn, though, because that way he would have been able to attack and still float 3 credits, as well as I think Suisse is just a more valuable card to have in hand because of its ability to pin multiple units.
Uumoi thinking, I do really want those buffs. I do want to find Cass. Maybe I just play Lend-Lease this turn. I don't think that's insane. You are missing out on the ability to get your attacks before a potential Scorched Earth comes out. But you're also playing around Scorched Earth in a way by, playing less units and not. Now, why would you play that first? Well, okay, if he's not
I think
going
his idea is he's just going to go all face with the bombers, because your opponent has 1 fighter left in their deck. They're probably not going to have it.
And you still get to hold up 3 credits.
Yeah,
so,
and if your opponent just pushes all their ground units up, you can Monty go face with the bombers again, and you basically just win. And if your opponent tries to clear with the Winter Offensive, that's the reason not to do the Wellington play, which is a little bit more damage, but if your opponent does have a Winter Offensive, suddenly it's looking a lot worse for you. So I do quite like this play. Azzy, unfortunately for Moy, does find the 39th off the top, which is going to let him take that second I2 I was just played, take out the Suisse, and, I mean... And he can push up the 272nd as well, and Moy is going to have to rely entirely on the ability of Wellington plus Monty, but he finds the Ultra now. That is going to be quite big, and the cast pickup as well. That's going to mean that Scorched Earth is not enough to keep Azzy alive without healing.
And he's just going to hit his opponent in the noggin. He says, well, that's a lot of beefy guys he got on board, but your HQ, that it doesn't have as much health as all the units.
And Azzy, unfortunately, does not find any of his 3 Call to the Colony, so he's not going to be able to heal. And
but he can technically survive this turn if his opponent has diddly squat.
That is true. He procs Ultra with the Scorched, leaving Moy with just the 2-4, but he's
can
dead
lead
to...
with Lend-Lease.
Yeah, he's dead to Empire strikes, end attack. He's a Decas end attack. Moy is out of the blitzers, so if Moy can't end it this turn, Azzy has a good chance of coming back, but unfortunately, Moy does find the cast, and he is able to put this game away. And, I mean, all of the cards in his deck that are great into this matchup were not enough for Azzy to win this. And this is sort of what I meant at the beginning of this set when I said Azzy picked Rock versus Moy's Paper. That matchup is practically unwinnable. And this matchup is definitely favored for Azzy. That was a very speedy mulligan. And that hand from Azzy is not looking excellent.
Yeah, it's not bad to use a Winter Warfare early to clean up 30 seconds, but it does depend a lot on how Moy plays this. He doesn't want to super extend both because of the Winter Warfare, but also because of the triple Scorched Earth.
Yeah, early PIR draw, that draw there for Moy, very good. Lets him just play at a single unit that is going to be a threat. It baits out the defend in depth.
I don't like this from Moy. I feel like you kept the Skytrain in opening hand because you recognize the kind of grindy matchup that this usually turns into. I think you should be playing it on Gree, maybe. Although you do get absolutely blown out by 52k.
As well as Scorched, I'm not a fan of playing a turn 3 Skytrain if there's already a unit in the support line against Soviet control. Because if they Scorched 2 units in your support line, plus Skytrain.
Well, I think you probably you shouldn't keep the Skytrain then, right? If you're not able to play it this early.
I think it's fine because you keep it 30 seconds. If you spam out a bunch of 30 seconds and it gets Winter Warfared, and you can play Skytrain on 3 by itself, maybe. Or if you're able to push all of your units to the front line, but that's probably not going to happen if you're playing 30 seconds. Yeah. I mean, it is a very valuable card down the line.
Already both Winter Warfare's gone, so this IS-2 is going to have a much harder time having as big of an impact as you're looking for.
That 5th Ranger's draw is just what you want to see if you're Moy. And Azzy's hand, Winter Offensive and ISU, very good cards in the matchup, but as you mentioned, Winter Warfares are gone, and he doesn't need to survive that long. Second defendant depth is going to be really good.
This is the point in game where Scorched Earth can start to get slightly awkward. So that is sort of what we meant when we were looking over the deck lists and saying how some people don't like the Scorched Earth because you are a unit-based deck. It's just in the other matchups we've seen so far, your opponent's units have been coming out earlier.
Yeah, that's a very good draw for Moy. Not the best draw in his deck. I think he'd be perfectly fine with a 40 War drawing his opponent 2 there. It's drawing him 5. Those draws off the Call to the Colony is not really what you want to see. If he still had a Winter Warfare in hand, that'd be a very different situation, because then you can use those 2 Scorched, maybe even a bit of healing off the Call to the Colonies, delay the game into a full board wipe. But the full board wipe at the end of the line is looking a lot more questionable, because if a We Can Do It can come out here, that Winter Offensive is going to do a lot less.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was a little surprised by both of those Winter Warfares when they did come out, just because they felt a little bit early for the matchup from what I'm used to.
Yeah, they did feel a little bit premature. Something I would like to point out about Azzy's play, though, that I really like is he played the 2 guards on opposite sides of the HQ, the T60 and the Briance. You can't see it anymore, but that does show awareness of this matchup. Moy is running 2 patrols, which critically says it deals 2 damage and removes destruction effects, but it also removes guard. So if you have all your guards on the same side of the HQ, you can remove guard from the one next to the HQ, and suddenly all the other ones are no longer a chain of guard protecting the HQ. They're just protecting absolutely nothing, and you can just go all face. So it is quite critical, especially in this guard-heavy deck, that you do disperse your guards on either side of the HQ, which makes it really awkward for Rima, but it does stop you from just dying with a full board of guards to a single patrol.
A pretty nice winter offensive. It also would have been a really nice scorched earth. Which line would you have gone for there, Jacob?
I think I would go for the winter offensive just because you are worried about the we can do it. Just keeping all of those, because that's enough units on the board that your Moi is fine with them being scorched. Because they're not taking up too much room that you can't play more units, and they're big enough that they're actually posing threats. Especially with it now, we see 2 Blitzkriegs and Moi's patented pattern in
Not
hand.
exactly when you want to see it.
No, you don't really want to be blitzing Skytrain.
And going for the 99th on this Sherman in the backline, which is a little odd with how things line up on the board, but there is always the threat of 39th. He just saw it last game, doing quite a bit of work. I can't blame him for having that fear.
And he's seen 2 defendant depths from Assy, and Assy is running copies of the hammer. So by playing it on this Sherman, you're basically saying the only way your opponent can kill Sherman is either he finds a way of dealing 1 damage to it and Naval Brigade, which he can't deal 1 damage to it, or Partisan, which is just going to give you a Sherman back. So it actually works out really well.
There is the consideration of Partisans and Red Banner.
Yeah, that is true.
It is relatively low chance to see that.
And this hand it's not quite enough for Moi yet, but it is entirely possible that he can just kill his opponent next turn. Depending
it's a lot of damage just from hand, which is always very potent, but guards reduces damage significantly even if there's just 1 on the board.
And it looks like he's going for the patent just primarily for the cost reduction. If you play 2 units with patent, you've essentially gained a credit slot. Because the first unit cost reduced by 1, but that's the one you pay for patent. So it lets him
so didn't playing this do nothing? Because he has 1 credit left?
He played 3 units though, so it got him.
My bad. Yes, you're right.
And
saying I can't really afford to play around Scorched anymore, which I agree with. And the additional cost of the credits doesn't have too major of an impact for him here. But it still doesn't feel nice. You want to be doing everything efficiently with US midrange, and once somebody plays Scorched Earth grinds you down, you're not really playing so efficiently anymore, and it's just painful to go through.
If you're Assy, do you even play the Scorched Earth? Because if your opponent pushes up Skytrain, I think you're perfectly fine with that, because it lets you kill it easier. And at this point, you're not expecting the last 2 cards in your opponent's hand to be double Blitzkrieg. I do like this parade over the Call to the Colonies, because right now you are looking for specifically units, but also you might need that Call to the Colonies for its healing later down the line. Now here, do you play the Scorched Earth and Rima, or do you just play the Rima? He goes for the Scorched Earth into the Rima. And
it's fair. It makes another Sherman here more annoying to play, potentially. Although you do want the trade anyways, and you're not too concerned about... Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. But at the same time, the longer the game goes on, the less these credits matter.
And I think that's a pretty big mistake by Moi not moving up the Greyhound, because now Partisans can clear this. Now, it is going to take the entire turn. But if you're Assy, you're perfectly fine taking the entire turn to remove your opponents to 6-2, I think.
Are you sure you don't want to just play IS-2, though?
That is also
you're out of
fair.
Winter Warfares. You're not holding it to find the combo. You can play it. It's a big threat. It has heavy armor. Nothing is currently dealing damage to it.
I'm not convinced by the drop line at all.
Yeah, and I think you can go for more consistent lines than this one. I think this is going to work out with the first rifles and Uumoi not having half track in hand. At least not unless he top decks it.
So he's going to take out the Skytrain and goes for the T60 instead of the first rifles to play around half track.
That's
And
not
actually,
insane.
yeah, it gets punished pretty hard by we can do it. But Moy finds another blitz tank, and suddenly you gotta start doing math. So that's 4, 6, 9. He can't attack with all the tanks and Sherman. Unfortunately, he's 1 credit off being able to attack with everything, which actually it would not be lethal.
Be close though.
It would be ludicrously close. However, with just one of these infantry is sticking in the front line, he's just going to push everything up because he knows what his game plan is now.
I'm a little confused.
Unfortunately, his game plan, I think, is just...
Well, is there a reason to really not move up the Greyhound? Like, 3rd Scorched Earth? Are you, like, allowed to play around that by this point in the game?
Oh, you mean... Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair, pushing up the Greyhound. I mean, you're not really worried about more board clears. And as he going for the Spy Ring, I feel like this is a little greedy. He gets...
it does feel like he keeps taking more risk than he needs to this turn. Granted, the risk that he's taking is, like, still very minute.
Yeah, from Asu's perspective, he doesn't know Moy's hand is 2 Blitzkriegs and 2 Blitz tanks. He thinks, oh, I'm at practically full health with card advantage, essentially board advantage. I have nothing to worry about. But in these matchups, you have to be thinking, how can I possibly lose this game? I'm clearly in the lead. How can I possibly lose this game? Very good call, again, playing the first rifles on the other side of the HQ, which is going to stop patrol. And the math commences once again. Half track can bounce the first rifles. He's going to peel back the full off the T60.
I wonder if this would have been lethal with Greyhound in the front line. Granted, as he might have played things a little differently if he saw the Greyhound in the front line.
Yeah, if you see that play from your opponent, you're definitely thinking about a Blitzkrieg at that point.
Yeah. Well, but he's not trading off the 6-2 in the 2-4 when your opponent has a 2-2 artillery. Like, surely you're already thinking about Blitzkrieg, right?
And I like this play from Moy. You're just sort of recognizing that I'm not going to have the credits to do a double Blitzkrieg and attack with everything if these units keep sticking on board. So I'm just going to get the damage in now.
So Moy only effectively had 2 more credits with the Greyhound to the front line, so it wouldn't have really made a difference.
The third Scorched Earth top deck is going to allow Azzy to Scorched Earth first rifles Rima either side of the board. He's going for the flying bomb. This is a little risky. I feel like you can't lose if you go for the Scorched Earth double guard.
I'm not sure he loses this way either.
I mean, I think...
It's pretty good.
It's
not
one
lethal,
off lethal. That is 1 off lethal, though.
Is it? Wait.
If my math is
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that... Azzy playing with fire, but... Moy will have 1 draw for strategic bombing.
If that was a Hellcat, it was lethal for Uomoy, which you had 1 more in the deck, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I would have liked to see Azzy go for the Scorched Earth double guide play. It's a lot slower. You're removing a lot less units. We can do it in the future. Could make these units tougher. This is probably the best opportunity for ISU you're going to have this game. But if your opponent's last card in hand is Hellcat and the draw is Blitzkrieg or vice versa, you do just lose. And that is a risk I feel like you just don't have the other way. He goes for the Partisans to get an amount of healing and also to ISU to the front line, so he's now exclusively dead to strategic bombing. That is not a strategic bombing. But Azzy, still no way of healing. I mean, he can end the game next turn, so he can put Moy in a strategic bombing top deck or bust situation.
Is there
he
really any
goes for
relevant
heroes.
elite here?
No, he can't end the game any faster, and he can't get any guaranteed healing off of Heroes of the Soviet Union.
It does feel a little odd. Like, it doesn't feel like it usually matters either way.
And this is actually quite big, because this could very easily buy Moy another turn. I guess not really, because if he goes for first rifles, then he finds the strategic bombing! We saw Azzy with the Chaika top deck. We saw Azzy with the Scorched Earth top deck. But now Moy coming in, it's his turn for the top deck, and it is top deck strategic bombing to end game 3 and take it 2-1 over Azzy. And Azzy needed to win this tournament, and unfortunately for him, that's not happening. But Moy needed to win this match, and he is well on his way to clinching his spot in the OCC Ultimate now.
Yeah, even with those small mistakes from Azzy, Moy had to get a lot of things going just right, like the 35T and the strategic bombing. Like, it's not just the strategic bombing top deck. He also needed a 35T. Even if it was a Greyhound, it wouldn't have been enough because it wouldn't have dealt enough damage.
You could tell like how invested I was into that, because when we came back to I was like this close to my computer. I was like leaning up in the chair,
just licking the webcam.
But that series went every which way, because I think when it started off, like that opening game where Moy kept the piracy, didn't really draw much in the way of any type of Brit Air unit, and you're like, oh, Moy's gonna have a hard time. That second game started with another weird draw, and eventually Moy wins it, comes back into game 3 with like, hey, got some momentum, as he playing with fire a little bit, but then you're like, oh, this just swung the other way, as he's got this now. All he needs to do is, oh, never mind, strategic bombing. Yeah, that was a heck of a series there.
And I think it really goes to show just how complicated the Soviet France deck is. We've seen a lot of players start bringing it into this tournament. We've seen a lot of players playing it on ladder. And just because the deck is popular, I think a lot of people might underestimate how difficult it is to play, because watching Azzy play that deck, he played around Patrol properly, and that's a mistake a lot of players make. He knew to time the Scorched Earth in that Brit Air game. He let the opponent play more units on board. He tried to bait out more into the Scorched Earth to get the value. He knew how to play around that. And it's just that mistake he made. He's still, with all of that play that he does perfectly on point, and it's very like high level play that a lot of players might miss, and it's things you have to learn, and it's somewhat deck specific. He still makes a slight mistake, and that costs him the game.
I think at one point you mentioned like a slight mistake, but also there could have been things he was thinking he was playing around, or things that he was expecting to see and thought, hey, this might just be the best line for me, and maybe I have to take a bit of a gamble to win it out. Because I think, to your point, Jking, it's almost like it's deck specific, but matchup specific reps you need to get in playing against a certain list to make sure that you know what to counter, what to play around. And I think that there's only so much you can do in certain scenarios like that.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe Azzy was primarily starting to play a little bit more for value near the end there, and I think it was a little early to transition to that point. Just because you're in a nearly unlosable spot doesn't mean you're in an unlosable spot. And you're always going to come ahead on value against that deck, even if you're not playing this draw and you're just slapping down these guard units as fast as you can.
Yeah, I think you called it out there. The slight nuances of, not completely unlosable, just in a very unlikely to lose scenario. And I think, Jking, you brought up a great point too, right? Where you just sit there and you go, okay, what can lose me the game, and how do I play around it? Because I know if I get one more turn out of it, and then another turn after that, I'm probably in a better spot just from having the better end game, bigger units, and better value. So I still think that was a heck of a series on both sides. I think both players played fairly well, and just, like you said, those tiny little misplays or incorrectly reading your opponent's hand absolutely changes everything. So congrats to Moy, moving forward, getting some points, getting in a much better spot for the Ultimate coming up next week. So we're going to bring you the fourth quarterfinal to wrap up this day one of the April OCC right after this. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for the final quarterfinals of day one for the April OCC Clash. We have the return of a bit of a familiar face. It's Flake over there. Welcome back to the world of KARDS, Flake.
Well, I had to come back. First of all, I love this game. This game is great. I've been playing it like crazy. But the other thing about this was I got a message that said, would you like to cast with one of your favorite people, one of your best friends? I said, absolutely. Bubbles is back. I would love to play, do this whole thing with Bubbles. But Bubbles, where's your bird, man? What happened to your bird?
He's over there. He'll get loud in a little bit. Don't you worry. He's actually...
No, I worry.
He's been eating through his perch lately. It's. I looked it up when he started doing it. It said it's perfectly normal for birds to eat wood, and he's got a wooden perch. But what I don't get is it's his favorite perch, and he sits on it all the time, and yet he's decided to destroy it in his rage and anger against the universe. But don't worry, he's over there. I'm not gonna lie, I thought you were gonna pull a switcheroo. Do you want to cast with your favorite person? And then you heard Spoos was ill, so you had to cast with Bubbles instead. I thought there was gonna be one of these switcheroos, Paul.
No, man. If we're gonna go on this journey together, I gotta make sure that we're like holding hands and on the same page, buddy. All right. So I'm setting the table.
Just holding hands from across an ocean. Actually, Bubbles, we're just rotating in a bunch of Canadians here. You're the only one holding down the fort on the European side of things here.
You say European side, they kind of did something, where I'm from, they sort of, we'll call it a misadventure. They took a little bit of a step out. They went out for a smoke break and the door was shut behind us when we went out to smoke. And...
That's a valid point. You're literally on an island. Like literally on an island between the two of us. But we love you anyway. We're happy to have you both here because we've got our fourth quarterfinal. We've got Head versus NoOne5 coming up, and these are two titans of the KARDS esport world. We've got Head on top of the rankings for the OCC Ultimate. We've got NoOne pretty much guaranteed a qualification spot for the Ultimate as well. So both these players maybe don't have as much on the line as some others do, but they're bringing their A game. So let's bring up the player profiles here and take a look at exactly how they performed this past season. NoOne5 playing 319 matches, 83% win rate, finishing third. Bubbles, I know you're really tied into the KARDS community. NoOne, I mean, one of the top players in the game. What do you got to say about NoOne?
Yeah, I mean, he's a classic player. He's been around for a long time. He's been contesting, rank 1 spots multiple times, trying to fight Jking for those. And you see their stats are actually quite similar. Obviously you've got the top 6 finish. And there's sort of the logic, once you're top 6, all you're really playing for is clout. So if you see that season finish be anything above 6th place, they're just doing it just for a little bit of extra clout. But also these total matches being really quite low, and then pairing that up with this super, super high win rate. You got 83% on NoOne. I believe Jking's was 85%. And I think NoOne only has about 40 or 50 more matches than Jking does. So there's a lot of comparisons between these two players. They've both had, huge impacts on KARDS, on KARDS as just a game, and you can really see it in their decks. Whenever these guys bring to tournaments, their whole community follows. You start off with the competitive community follow, we all try out their stuff, and then that leaks down ladder, and before you know it, NoOne5 brings a deck to a tournament, and then like a month later, people who are just opening the game for the first time are facing these decks. So that's the sort of impact NoOne has on the game.
And we got NoOne and Jking on opposite sides of the bracket, so there could be a NoOne Jking finals here in the April OCC. Flake, you've played every card game known to man at this point, and I want to say that a win rate in a card game, because of the randomness that does come into effect, like 60%, 65% is probably an outstanding win rate in most games. And then you got players like NoOne and Jking coming in at 83%. How insane is that when you think of what goes into a win rate in that many games?
It's unprecedented, and frankly, you're right, because if you're approaching 60%, that is in the elite range. Anything that is above 55% is really above rate. If you can convert at a 60% clip, that puts you in a different echelon. 83% is, to put this into perspective, is absolutely unheard of. It is Hall of Fame worthy. It is, President's Trophy winning kind of a performance here. It is what you can really the result of this, frankly, is with an 83% win rate, he only played 319 games. So you can do that. When you're converting at this clip, you can do that. Now, the other part about this is the fact that War Machine, as No One 5's favorite card, is a exceptionally boring choice. So that is where I'm going to try to find fault with this slide that we have here. It is that his favorite card is terrible.
The fact that that is the only call out just goes to show the strength of Noan's last season. Let's bring up heads. And here is his opponent. Head, only a 76.38% win rate. Just, absolutely tragic. Bubbles, we got Head here on top of the points leaderboard. What do you got to say about Head?
So yeah, Head is no stranger to competitive CCGs, being an ex-Yu-Gi-Oh pro, and I've seen some Yu-Gi-Oh cards. There is a lot of words on those. I look at a Yu-Gi-Oh card, and I give up instantly. I don't even get halfway through the cards. This is why I like aggressive decks, because there's not many words on the cards. But not being a stranger to competitive CCGs and really just showing that in cards. The moment they came into the competitive scene in cards, they just started dominating. And we've seen that in this Officer Club season, where if you look at the Officer Club leaderboard at the moment, Head is just destroying it. And I think going into the Ultimate, if you purely base things off like tournament finishes and tournament performance, Head is the #1 person looking to win that Ultimate at the moment. They are the person you should be really looking towards. Focus on what decks they're bringing, and if you're another player going into that tournament, focus on what decks you're going to need to bring to beat Head, because it is very, very likely, if you want to win the OCC Ultimate, you are going to have to defeat Head, and that is a lot easier said than done.
Absolutely looking to have somebody, really cement themselves as a top player, and this could be Head's opportunity to put themselves up there in the way of creating a legacy like Noan, like Jking, and these players. But speaking of a legacy, Flake, those luscious locks of Head's, I mean, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of his haircut.
Oh, definitely. Head in this picture, seen here auditioning for the movie 8 Mile, apparently. This total matches, though, is what I want to touch upon, because it's almost double what his opponent has played, and the win rate is going to suffer, obviously. Basically, those things kind of tend to taper out, but 76%, again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, talking about his opponent, 76 again those are Hall of Fame style numbers. The wins 456. Now, what does more reps get you? It works on things like your muscle memory. As soon as you see an opponent play a particular card, you can look at your hand, and there's less opportunity for you to overthink things. You've been through more scenarios. You are better equipped to deal with what is ahead of you. Those 1% scenarios, you'll bump into them more often. You'll be better equipped and better prepared to deal with them. So 2 titans in this game with just monster win rates are going head to head here. Head, however, has easily an additional 250 plus games under his belt this season.
Absolutely. And we have both these players, like we mentioned, have essentially solidified their spot in the Ultimate. So as we start to get ready to take a look at the decks, I do wonder if maybe it's time to test something new, play something a little bit different. You don't need to come in with necessarily your best, strongest lineup, because this, not to say the tournament's meaningless. I think both of them, want to perform well, but why don't we bring them up and take a look and see exactly what both of these players are bringing here today, and go from there. So, Bubbles, why don't you take us through Noan's list here?
So Noan has taken your advice and frankly thrown it out the window, which I think is sort of quite consistent with these high-level cards players. You can offer them a little bit of fun, a little bit of, enjoyment on the side, but at the end of the day, they'd rather bring, Britair and USA Frontline. But I think, there's a lot of logic to bringing the decks bringing the decks you've used again to try and practice for these tournaments. Nothing too crazy to see here, other than this Soviet ramp deck on the end. This is the deck I more want to focus on. This deck has seen a little bit of play on ladder. A few people have been trying to, try it out, but it's never really been able to break out like other Soviet decks, like Soviet France, which we've seen a lot in this tournament. This is often called ramp or Soviet ramp, just because you focus on having these war machines, and then you use that to try and get these big payoffs, the B-17, the Flying Fortress, and the Partisans. And we do see as well, we've got Confusion in the deck, as well as Red Banner and 2 Euro Factories. So there may be opportunity to steal the enemy units. It's quite good against like Brit Air. If you can get there, you take their Swordfish, you trade away with it, and then you Euro the Confusion unit. So this is the sort of outlier, and that's the deck I think we should see the most interesting sort of movement from moving forward, because these other 2 decks, this Brit Air deck and this USA Frontline deck, I mean, I could give a lot of info on them, but we've all seen them about 1,000 times, so I don't want to spend too long on them. I do want to point out, though, the double naval supply run for the Brit Air deck is a little bit weird. Most people only run 1, but that's such a small detail that I don't think it's, too crazy. As well as these engineer regiments, some people prefer this. It sort of acts like a mini, we can do it to keep your board alive. But again, I don't think it's too crazy, and I don't think it's anything no one's seen before.
Flake, do you think this goes back to what you were saying around, getting the reps in, right? Instead of bringing something different, trying something new, let me bring what I'm comfortable with and just get more tournament practice so I can hone in my lineup for the OCC Ultimate coming up in a week.
So the mentality that you want to bring into this is you can kind of get cute with it. You can kind of look and play the game of what is my opponent bringing, how do I best counter it, etc. But in that case, oftentimes, your ladder deck and your tournament decks might differ in that regard. You're playing that extra mind game, and if you're adding those extra layers of complexity to your prep, then you're running out of you run out of time in terms of actually playing those, because the practice you're going to have with those lists, you'll have to have training partners, people that you can play, because you might not run into the proper lists on ladder. You might not get that lucky. So oftentimes in all the card games I've ever played, the pros that I talk to, whenever they're confused, they lean on what they know. They lean on what they're comfortable with, because it's just, like I mentioned, you have the reps. So at the very least, the scenarios ahead of you and how to address them. And even though your opponent might play some funky stuff against you, you can at least rely on your own strengths and weaknesses, and then sort of try to execute a strategy the old-fashioned way, which is how you've done it on ladder, how you've been relying on it. So playing what being comfortable eliminates a lot of variables on your own side when you don't necessarily know what the variables are going to be on the other side.
Right on. Speaking of the other side, let's bring up Head's list of decks. And Bubbles, why don't you break us down? I mean, maybe very generally, because I feel like we've seen this exact lineup at least once before today.
I mean, if you look at the sort of the left side of the screen, not too far left, or you'll just get the nice picture of Head, which is lovely. But if you look just a little bit less to the left over there, you'll see pretty much 2 very similar decks. We've got this USA Frontline again, and then once again, we have this Brit Air deck. Everyone's seen it, everyone knows it. Everyone either loves it or hates it. It's a little bit like Marmite. And then Soviet, we've got this Soviet France deck, which we're going to see a fair bit of in this tournament. It's gaining a lot of popularity very quickly. A big part of this is for its ability to play against this USA mid-range deck, while also not falter against other decks. It's very easy to counter specific meta decks. It's really not a difficult thing to do once you understand the game well. The difficult part is countering a meta-specific deck and still being able to beat other decks that exist in the game. And this is something this Soviet France deck does quite well. I think it might be a little bit weaker in the mirror, in the Soviet mirror against Soviet Ramp from Nern 5, just because that's a little bit more of a sort of big pieces, get them down nice and on good tempo with these war machines. So it might suffer in the mirror, but overall it's a much more versatile deck, and it's very good against the meta decks. But there's nothing too crazy here.
Right on. Flake, anything you want to add to Bubbles' kind of breakdown of what Head's bringing and a little bit of the why behind it?
First off, Marmite sucks. That's we can just put that to bed right now. But the other part here is just generally the contrast between the frontline US list here, which is a lot of, okay, I know what I want, and I'm just going to fill the deck with those copies of those particular cards. I want multiples of the stuff that makes this work. But if we contrast that necessarily to, let's say, this, this Soviet list, look how long it is. It's like I like to call this the red carpet, because it just goes on forever, and it's a whole bunch of one-ofs of the big stuff. The main impactful elite level cards, and look how many there are in there. Same thing with the British list. So oftentimes you can go with this synergistic list that wants to own an aspect of the board, such as the frontline build with the US. Otherwise, you just want the good stuff. And that is particularly in certain cases, once you get those swordfish, those gladiators set up, and you can kind of combo and control the board in that regard. Other times, it's just a matter of saying, hey, I want to drop a sexton, I want to hit a shelling and sort of, buy some time and control the board. And then on the Soviet side, it's just a lot of big stuff. And that can oftentimes just late in the game be too much to handle when every top tech that you're drawing is significant.
Right on. So, Bubbles, we've got the past experience of just ban Berto. So we'll ask you, Berto's favorite question. What are the bans looking like in this matchup?
So I think Noan is going to spend not too long thinking about it and ban Berto. And then I think Head is going to spend not too long thinking about it and ban Berto.
Blake?
I will say that I've been playing a lot of Berto. It's a very strong deck. It's one of those decks that, like you said, rock, paper, scissors in a certain degree. If you get a 1-2-3 turn, it is hard to come back from. So I would just try to put that out of it and just say, let's just ban those lists outright.
Seems to be the common call that we see in tournaments month in and month out. Let's bring up the bans and take a look. The survey says... Yep. Very little thought, very easy decision making here. No, if he bans, then I ban. It's just, let's get Berto out of here. So we will see one mirror matchup in the Soviet list. The exchange will be slightly different, and we're actually going to see it right now. We're going to have that Soviet France versus the Soviet US ramp deck.
Yeah, starting off, though, neither player has anything to throw down on the board right away, so it's just going to be pass over into turn 2 land. But the Yak 2, good opener.
It's a very strong opener, and this card, it rings true in a lot of CCGs where draw is one of the most important things, especially in these sort of control mirrors. If you can out-resource your opponent, you're in a really good spot. And this Yak, without an answer from Head, and Head is not going to have an answer for a long time. Head can put down, the tank on turn 4 and then try and deal with it that way. But no one is going to get so much value from this. Oh, there's a V1 flying bomb. Scratch everything I said.
I have already disregarded it completely. The question I was actually going to ask you here was, without drawing an answer here, are you just going to go ahead and use that spiring, the research to just get rid of it right away? Or in a match that might go long in a control-related matchup, do you value those researches for their late-game potential versus just getting that unit off the board early?
So yeah, the research late game is obviously super value, but when you look at the sort of German one, the late game one that you really want to go for is this U-boat. And part of why this U-boat is so good is not only because it kills the unit, but it gets rid of 2 cards from your opponent's hand. But if you've had to give your opponent, 5 or 6 cards from the Yak, you're not actually taking cards away from their hand. You're killing a unit and you're giving them 4 cards. So just using it now, getting rid of it with this V1 flying bomb, you get the advantage that you would get from the U-boat in cards with this discard without having to give your opponent all these resources over time. And we see Noan finding that War Machine a little bit late. Really, you want this on turn 2 because you can do turn 2 War Machine and then you can get these 5th Rangers out on turn 3 and you can just use these over and over again because of the 0 up cost. So we're going to see Noan now wait until a lot later in the game, I imagine, to use this. And instead try and focus a little bit more on fighting for board presence. Like Berto and Jking mentioned, these are quite unit-based decks, so board presence is going to matter and it is going to play an impact this game.
It's 1 guard down as the taking of the front line is complete here. No one is well positioned and just digging in. Those units on the front line, however, are quite weak, very fragile, both at 1 health left here. Double guards protecting Head's life total down to 18. And these units here, the French Guard offering the mobilization to both to the flanks here at the end of the turn. How important is it to just get that off the board?
It is unbelievably important to deal with it in one way or another. You can go straight for the throat and just get rid of the Rima, get rid of the French Guard as soon as possible, or you can focus on killing the 2 side units. One of the issues, if you go for the Rima, is those units on the side are still going to retain that mobilize when it's dealt with. And that's probably why we saw Noan going straight for the first rifles to try and clear those out, and instead of just going straight for the throat, try and get rid of the things that are being buffed by it. But obviously that's a more short-term solution, and you can see Head putting down more units and getting more of those mobilized buffs. And really, I think this is a big difference in this sort of French version of the deck in the mirror, is this Rima, this French guard, is so high value, and it just offers so much potential. And it really says to Neon 5, you have to deal with this as soon as possible.
Establishing another 3/7 guard unit in the tank. That's going to spit out one little dude per turn, which can be incredibly annoying. They operate for free. It's just another way to just continuously populate the front line, make it a little bit more greasy for you to just punch through. And not only that, but a 3/7 is a pretty hefty body in order to actually get through. So that is going to be needing some help later on. The hammer can definitely put some work into that. However, again, Head here just continuously giving something for that Rima to just feed, give mobilization to. He's opting rather to develop board rather than to make the trades, opting to get no one to frankly pay for these trades here. But it's starting off here. Partisans take control of an enemy unit. We love this because that is going to go ahead and get a 2-for-1, and the destruction effect helpful as well. That was a very valuable value trade.
There's something to keep an eye out with these light infantry as well. These little guys that are being spat out by the armored train. Well, usually they're, just a little bit of stats to help clog the front line and maybe trade with some things. They actually offer some really nice utility in this matchup, which is they can be used to pop these mobilized units. You give these things mobilized. Well, I don't necessarily need to trade them because I can just throw one of these light infantry into it and do the 1 damage and remove the mobilized buff. So they do have a little bit of extra utility there.
Yes, the famed Starship Captain Zap Brannigan said, "Send wave after wave of men at them," and that's basically what no one's doing over here. Because every turn, spitting one out. Tractor Factories, 2 of the T-34s coming out to the front line. That is a nice way to develop the board in a hurry as we do move forward. A 1-1, not much of a threat on the front line, but again, you do have to punch through it, and if you don't touch it, well, hey, you can always, like you said, pop the mobilization basically for free. And that is a helpful aspect here of those little 1/1, those tokens that are being thrown out there at the end of every turn.
So this puts Head in quite a difficult spot as well, because there's just so many stats on the board. And, there's sort of 2 ways of thinking about Tractor Factories. I can drop it on turn 8 and get them down as soon as possible. Or generally, you then want to drop it on turn 12 when you can move up and attack with it. And Head just being put in an awkward position. And there's so many stats on the board, and the main answer to this in Head's deck is this Winter Warfare ISU combo. Obviously, the Winter Warfare doing 1 damage to everything, and then the ISU destroying all damaged units on board, clearing the board and leaving you with a mighty fine tank on the board. But that's just not really an option for Head at the moment. He hasn't got either combo pieces to pull that off, and he does only run 1 Winter Warfare. So I'm really concerned from Head's point of view how you're going to deal with this board. You do have some nice stats yourself, especially with the growing mobilize, but I think no one right now is just putting on so much more pressure and has so much more space to sort of move about, not just metaphorically, but also literally on the board state. Head has to kill his own units to get more units onto the board at the moment because you have to take the front line. No one can just start dropping things, even if there's not much use for them at the moment, just to get them out there.
So yeah, it's a double-edged sword here because, like you mentioned, no one in a significant point of control here. But at the same time, look at that. Every time a card is drawn, 2 damage is being done. So it's not like Head is just really on the back foot because there is some work that's being done here. But at the same time, if Head just continues to bunker down, no one is just going to populate the board. But it does become costly, especially we're progressing towards the late stage of the game, so you will have enough credits to move these tanks forward to attack with them. But that prevents some more board development. You are controlling, but eventually, if Head just keeps dropping more guards on the board and making it a little bit nastier and a little bit more cumbersome for him to actually access the HQ, it becomes problematic. It's neither. Obviously, no one 5 here is in the stronger position, but Head can play very economically and make better decisions, such as this trade over here, which is I have 0 attack, but I'm taking out an entire tank. Like that is a wonderful destruction effect that you can kind of go ahead and make these trades for. The hammer following through, clearing up the other tank. And again, you're well protected here, but these 1/1s, these tokens are just this meat shield that's almost, it seemingly becomes a very difficult prospect to economically get rid of them.
There's something I'm really concerned about as well. Once again, looking from Head's perspective, is this Partisans Euro Factories in Newton's Five's hand. Because, we've seen Head putting a lot of emphasis on guarding up this KV, but no one can just, whenever he wants, he can just Euro Factories the KV and get something on his own side from it. So I think that might really be a thorn in Head's plan. There is the second KV, and like you say, it's actually putting a large amount of pressure on Gnome 5. Obviously, he's ahead on board and quite ahead in the game in general, but also when you're playing this defensive and you're making these value trades, this KV does become a problem very quickly, and that's probably going to force Gnome 5 to do something about it as soon as possible.
Yeah, you're putting him on a clock, right? And if you can just buckle down, it's this slow burn effect that puts pressure on Noah to eventually make decisions that he might not want to make to address this particular problem. And like you mentioned, if you've got another one on the back, like just right off the back of this, if it becomes a very expensive endeavor for Noah 5 to get rid of that KV, then it becomes a different story. And there it is. The Partisans are going to go ahead, pick it up, but we're not done yet because it has already put in a lot of work. Euro Factories is going to make a trade, and that's a 7-7 in the front. So things have changed dramatically in a heartbeat. But that was the entire turn. No pressure yet to the actual HQ, and it's on Head now to address what just happened with a 7-7 now breathing down his neck.
Now, a lot of people wouldn't have seen this 7-7 before because it doesn't see much play outside of the draft game mode. So for the viewers that aren't familiar with this 7-7, it's pretty much what you see, a 7-7 with 2 op cost, but it actually has the inbuilt ability from Ura, which is leftover damage is down to the HQ. So if he attacks this tank, this guard tank with the 7-7, the 2 damage splashed over will actually hit the HQ. So it's a card a lot of people probably haven't seen as much, but it's quite good in this sort of position because you're going to be doing down trades fairly often, and this is going to give you some value on return in that.
Well, that's one way to bust through the guards, right? If there's a way to protect that unit, having that run over, like that spillover effect of damage can very much help out here. Now, again, we're going to go ahead and just clear out one of these tokens. And to a degree, you're doing the work almost for no one. You're paying for that trade to occur. But they operate for free anyways. What is something that Head's looking for here to really change the dynamic of the landscape of this game right now?
So a big card could potentially be Winter Offensive, doing 4 damage to everything, as well as both HQs, putting no one 5 in a very low amount of HP. And then if no one actually clears out his own hand, using like his war machines or something, you can use Phony War to make your opponent draw up to 8 and then finish them off with the KV burn. You put down the KV, then you go for the Phony War and you burn your opponent out. So I think something like a Winter Offensive could be really quite large for Head and really sort of change the tide of this, where no one's no longer thinking, how can I pressure Head into a situation where Head can't come back? They're thinking, oh no, Head's just going to burn me and kill me from the back line.
3-5 bomber in the back row. There's only one target for that. Again, like you mentioned, the 7-7 with the spillover damage effect. That's got to go. This leaves it wide open, basically, for the tank in the front line to just chew it up, unless you can slam a guard in front of it. This is a trade that feels so bad to make, but I understand the logic behind it. You desperately want to protect this bomber because that is what is going to be starting to value trade your way back. But the 1-1s in the front line, they're going to be just hunting for that bomber. They're just going to be gnawing away at it, right at the ankles of it. They're so annoying. That 3-7 tank in the back line that has been spewing out these tokens nonstop has become this buzzing swarm that has become very difficult to deal with. And like you mentioned, Head needs some sort of AoE like the Winter to do 4 damage across the board, even if necessary, sacrificing however many units you've got left. But a more equalized board, I think, is what Head is looking for here.
I think a very interesting thing as well is how much of Nolan's 5's hand is being shut down by the bomber's effect of cancelling out deployment. This 83rd Naval, obviously deployment, come down, kill a damaged unit, is really being, just shut down by Head's bomber. As well as this 39th, this can take control of something with 2 or less. So he obviously could come down and take control of the fighter as well. And we see Defend in Depth off the top. Obviously a very, very good removal spell is going to give Head a lot of options in ways of dealing with the board. But isn't necessarily going to swing the game in Head's advantage. It's more going to buy a little bit of time and slow things down a bit, but Head still needs something to sort of swing the game. And I think at this point, you're even looking for a Winter Warfare, which obviously only 1 damage to everything, nowhere near as explosive, but would just help you deal with this buzz of light infantry that you spoke about, which is just becoming such a problem. And Head's starting to say, you know what, I'm just going to try and burn you out. Goes for the healing, gives himself +2, goes face, but the engineers off Noen's top, Noen can gain 8 HP on the spot. Drop these engineers and trade all these light infantry away, and that just says any chance you had of burning me is gone. And I don't think Noen even necessarily needs to make that decision. They have plenty of time to sort of work out what they want to do, but it is scary that your opponent can just gain HP whenever they want with these light infantry and this engineer combo.
Well, it's a 1 credit gain 8. That potentially trading up, which is ridiculous in this case. As you can see, they're out there hunting. That's a +2 on the HQ defense. Sure, why not? You're also making space, as Noen 5 is just business here, moving the tank up, spending 5 credits. Now that tank can't attack, but you do know that he needs to make some space here at the same time without necessarily or without having to give up another production of another token. I would suspect that he's going to be trading in to the fighter as well. But at the same time, like you mentioned, that KV2 is going to put in some work, but he's just a little bit, finding, the life gain option Lord. Here. Look what everything's going on here. He has just packed the house here.
There's the winter offensives off the top. You're looking closer and closer to being able to just burn Noen out. Get rid of the engineers. You can go for the winter offensive, clear the board. But do you save it? That KV isn't necessarily under threat unless there's a naval in your opponent's hand. And obviously... Oh?
All right, so opting to just go ahead and pop the research. Is he expanding here? Does he want the oil?
I genuinely feel like the move here might just be draw cards with the French order. I'm so bad with names. I meant to be the one that knows all the cards, but you draw with the French order, the call to the colonies. There you go. It's come back to me now. And then you look for this phony war. When you play phony war, this burns out your opponent's HQ a bunch, and then you can finish off the game with the winter offensive.
Head now staring down a board that is not as dangerous as it looks. A lot of tokens in the front line. There's a tank that cannot attack. So the HQ is actually not under immense threat here. And so he's just going to go ahead and make some space here. And I can fully get on board with this. Again, just sacrificing one of the tokens. There's the damage being done. That is just go ahead, snipe one of the damaged units. And finally, it looks like the right time to just go ahead and clean house.
There's a possibility that Head is going to go for the final tier of research from this German research and go for the Uran project, which just destroys everything on the board. At which point, you can try and finish off the games with stuff like T-34 blitzing up to the front line and doing a little bit of burn with this winter offensive.
As it stands, he's weighing his options here. Again, a very critical juncture of this matchup. He is ahead on life, but that's about it. As he has put the work in, and I'm really curious to see how that... it was about 4 or 5 turns ago where you mentioned he's just opting to go face here. So we're going to go ahead and discard. We're going to take the U-boat, discard some cards, kill a unit, make it a little bit more digestible as it stands right now. Perhaps opting to just go ahead.
Mobilize off the top just lets Noen refill. You've discarded some of my hand, but now I can just refill my hand.
Heroes of the Soviet Union gives you a 3-pack of options, and on an empty board, you're
another engineers.
That's huge. That's massive right there. Typically, that's a card that you want the big guns, right? It's often very much a very attractive venture to just take the fattest, nastiest card, but this just guarantees a little bit more longevity, a little bit more security.
And with that engineers, I think it might be really difficult for Head to win, because previously you would have had the option to do winter warfare and then naval the engineers. But with all these light infantry on the board, which really, these light infantry are turning out to be the MVP of this game, just with how much health they provided and how much harassment they provided. You can't even go for the winter warfare naval option because you're going to heal your opponent 8 in the process. I think this is really looking to the point where Noen 5 sort of resources have outweighed Heads, and Noen 5 has been able to, obviously they've got these extra credits, but also they just have a heavier deck with this USA. You know, you've got cards like Mobilize, which draws you so many cards and gives you so many more options.
Tank coming in, blitzing down the 4 with the getting through that ambush effect, which would have dealt damage to it first. Dropping this guard here is going to buy you a little bit of more time because it's got a pretty hefty butt there that's not easily punched through off the front line. Not enough there. And if he does opt to actually go ahead and, put in all the work with multiple units to burn that down, which I don't think you even have access to. You've got 1, 2, 4. Yeah, you can only really push 5 onto it at the moment. And that actually is the right recipe. You burn it down to 5, and then you could just, on the follow-up turn, you could just trade in one of those tokens.
There is also this B-17. You do have a 50-50 chance of just sniping it outright with the B-17, which I think is a very attractive option. You know, you can drop this B-17, and then you can go for this ramp with the war bonds, and then just tickle face with the light infantry, assuming you've hit the...
I think it's win-win either way.
Yeah. I think you're happy no matter what. Goes for the war bonds.
All right, well, that's half the recipe. You've got the peanut butter. Let's see if he follows up with the jelly here. The B-17 Flying Fortress is going to destroy a random unit on the board. Looks like, okay, so he's biding his time here. Fascinating.
Maybe just waiting for a slightly more attractive thing to snipe with this B-17. You know, at the moment, Neon 5 is winning the game. And Neon 5 is on course to win the game. There's not really anything Head can do about it just yet. And anything Head can do to change the game, you want the B-17 as an answer. A big way this game could flip in Head's favor is a Winter Warfare into ISU, just destroying most of the board. Obviously, the first rifles will leave some residue with their replacement guard, but really that's where you want the B-17. You want the B-17 for the potential out that Head has.
I like that. Just, keeping the B-17 in your back pocket as an answer to a major threat is massive, especially, what happens if, a gigantic threat just hits the board and you have no answer to it because you got, I don't want to say greedy with the B-17 Flying Fortress, but if you can just eliminate random elements to the game, then it may take longer to get there, but why hurry a relatively sure thing? You got to have some outs here. Leave as little elements to chance and eliminate as many variables as possible. Holding on to the B-17 Flying Fortress, I think, is the more conservative play. It might mean that you're winning the game, in a couple extra turns, but it is great insurance to hold on to. So I'm not upset about that, that move right there. I think that it's a very responsible play.
I mean, I think it's certainly worth staying up past bedtime to win this match rather than throw it away, get to bed a little bit earlier, but just because you've lost. It's not really... It's one of these things I feel like a lot of less high skill and less high competitive players get baited into a lot. It's thinking, I can win the game next turn, or I can win the turn after that, instead of thinking about what's the highest chance to win, people think what's the quickest I can win. And what's the quickest I can win doesn't always give you the highest chance of winning. And really, to compete in these events, you need to look at chance of winning and not the speed at which it comes.
Whether you win on turn 5 or on turn 25, sometimes the safest route is the best way. If there's a 1%, improvement on your odds to win by taking the longer, safer route, you do it, especially at a tournament with these kinds of stakes. As we see the Winter Warfare going to clean up a lot of the board, but again, that's a lot of health gain. That's a lot of defense earned here. It wasn't too long ago, couples, where we were discussing some potential combos with the KV to go ahead and actually burn down the house. And that was when Noan 5 was at 7 or 9 defense. He's back up to 24 off of just being aggressive, off of a lot of things dying. There's the B-17 Flying Fortress going to just crush that guard. It's open season. 1 health remaining.
I think if you're Head here, you have to do there it is, just a little bit too late, that ISU. And that's not an out anymore. And I think you have to do the honorable thing and go for this winter offensive and go out on your own terms. You've got 1 HP, you've got an order which kills you on the spot.
Hell yeah.
Better to go out like this. Go out with a bang.
Go out with a bang. Do it.
And he's going for it. Yes.
Right. That is the best way to do it. Frankly, Bubbles, he says that no. You did not win. I chose to lose.
Head may have lost the match, but Head won in our hearts just with that final maneuver there, going for the winter offensive.
Christo and I have a friend named House, whose chief motivator, frankly, for many things is spite. And honestly, if spite is your win condition, well, it is 1-0 Head. Ultimately, though, that's not how it works. As No 5 has taken the first game here, it is 1-0, moving into the second match of the best of 3 here. No 5 up 1-0, taking in the US of A.
And this is an interesting matchup. This is meant to be a matchup where this Soviet deck is quite good. You know, you've got a lot of stalls, you've got things like Scorched Earth, you've got these Brianks and regulars. They're very good at slowing down the game. But even with all of this ways of beating USA mid-range, we just see an incredibly explosive start here from No 1. You know, with the turn 1 engineers into the turn 1 Panzer 35T, that's like one of the quickest openers in the whole game, only really second to none to like 15th Cav into Beef Wagon.
Not only that, but you got the half track to just potentially just crush through it, but there's no need to because there's nothing stopping you here from just pushing up some damage. The half track would potentially, you know, make way for a little bit more damage to punch through if you really want to get aggressive. But why not? The 507th in the back is just going to start buffing up the board, and then it's a one spot trade. What unit do you hate the most? You know, as you can see, it's rather Head's going to make this decision here, trading in. And again, just leaving things wide open for a lot more nasty effects. That 507th, you know, how high priority is that? Because that's going to just be feeding your units nonstop.
It's definitely a growing problem, but there are a lot of answers in it to Head's deck that Head can access later in the game. And as is traditional, it is the greediest card in the whole game. It only buffs itself. It never gives its buffs to anyone else. And I just like to point out, it was a very smart move from Head to focus on killing the engineers rather than the 35T, because on turn 4, the engineers were still in the front line. No one could just go straight for this Sherman and start generating value. And you know, I think this matchup, you mentioned not playing the half track on the irregulars and not worrying about rushing in this face damage. A lot of pressure coming out from No 1 actually, but usually you're playing a marathon and not a sprint. But we do see No 1 stepping up the pressure a little bit more, and I imagine Head must be thinking right now, does No 1 have another half track? Because if No 1 has another half track and you put down these first rifles, you do lose immediately.
Well, it's either answer or cross your fingers. There's 2 cards in hand here for No 1, but there's a Sherman there as well, which is going to give him options to find another, 2 spot. A 3/5 guard is going to do some work here. It's going to, trade into the 507th at the very least, but that's also game. You have to actually put in a little bit of work here to get through this. I think that this one is basically more or less wrapped up to the degree of a explosive start by No 5 in the 507th, connecting with a little bit of its friends here and there. But as you can see here, we got another guard to just follow through. And I like the trade of the fighter into the 4/4 to, again, make another uncomfortable trade if necessary, keeping him alive. But look at the pressure. He's down to the wire here. And, if you don't find another guard, if you don't find another answer, it's basically all done.
And we see this strategic bombing, which is a big part of why No 1's being so aggressive here, is because No 1 knows that if Head is at 2 or less, No 1 can kill Head through guards. Head does have this Call to the Colony's in hand, so can heal. However, this healing is really just stopping the inevitable. We've got this Sherman in hand. We've got ways of hating on the back line, and Head is going to be stuck in the back line. So even if you heal and go for a trade, really you're just buying time. You're not really swinging the game in your favor by much, and instead you're just buying time. And Head opting not to heal and to try and play around the half track, but No 1 just going to absolutely crush Head's backline and just go straight for the game right there.
That was impressive. Again, there was options. You got to sort of play around and play to your outs. And games like this that are over in an absolute blink of an eye, you were under the gun from the get-go. Like you mentioned, an explosive start. It seemed like Head was just playing at half health, like right out of the gate. As soon as he was able to make moves, it was just all done there, as No 5 just walks right over him. That frontline deck just took it, owned it, and pushed the tempo really, really effectively. And just out of curiosity, in that particular game, Bubbles, you're looking at, you're saying buying time, and sometimes buying time also buys you another card draw. And if that you do buy another card draw and another credit in your pocket, perhaps you find an out. What is the out that he might have found had he, let's say, went +8 health, drop a guard, and just or traded and just passed?
I feel like it's just a matter of time. Obviously, you can just find healing after healing after healing, and you can find cards like Winter Warfare to, start clearing the board. But you're talking a lot of ifs and buts, If I find a healing piece, and then I find some AoE, and then I find some more healing, and then I find a guard, and then I find this, and all no and 5s is diddly squat off the top, finding absolutely nothing. Maybe no one's game breaks and he just stops drawing cards. This is the sort of situation you're looking at. And it's really difficult because that matchup is traditionally meant to be a marathon. But no and 5 just ran the marathon in about 30 seconds. You're getting ready to run this marathon. You're doing your stretches, getting all ready. And then you see the other guy just bolting it. You think he can't keep up at that rate. And then you see him at the finish line. And you're like, oh.
That's sort of one of those high risk, high reward types of situations, right? Where you say, yeah, you know what? I think I can do this. And then you just go all in. And if it works, you win the game. And if you don't, you probably get punished. But that's also part of the advantage of being up 1-0 in the series, where you go, yeah, if this doesn't work, I've got another life. I can come back around and try to, seal the deal in the third game. Right on. So big congratulations to Noah for securing the final spot in the semifinals. Head, probably not too upset, sitting at the top of the point ranking. So definitely going to be qualifying for the ultimate. Thank you all for tuning in today for day 1 of the April OCC. Stay tuned. Join us tomorrow for semifinal Saturday, where we've got Jking taking on Jin, and we've got No and 5 taking on Moy. More cards action for you tomorrow. Thank you for watching.